Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So simple. Roll out.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 538 for June 12th, 2023. And I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
And I'm Ryan McQuaid.
And I'm the maestro, Jalen.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. This is the moment we've all been waiting for. We have been doing
I guess so, yeah.
film for
this
10
is totally
years,
an InSession Film topic right here.
leading to this moment. And it comes off the heels of an article that I wrote last week at InSessionFilm.com that was also 15 years in the making. Since 2007's
a lot of research.
Transformers hit the screen. Yeah, that's been a topic of conversation in the InSession Film household for quite a long time. I don't even want to know,
baby.
Yeah, who knows how many times I've referenced that on the show over the years, and countless other times off the mic. And so I felt inspired with the new Transformers film out. It was time to talk about Steve Jablonsky and his greatness and what he did with the Michael Bay Transformers films. By far, the best thing about those films. Not even
Yeah,
close.
it's interesting. You talk about his great work with Transformers. I'm looking at his filmography as a composer, and it's interesting to say the least.
Is.
When you
It is.
when you separate Transformers away from that, I mean, you've got classics like Skyscraper and Red Notice. You can't forget that one.
Yeah. No, he took his money and went home, basically.
More or less. Yeah.
He hasn't done a whole lot since, and the things he has done has just been, for a paycheck. I will say, though, his work on Pain and Gain is really good. I think that's
let's also not
Pain
forget
and Gain.
Yeah, Pain and Gain's good. Also, let's not forget Desperate Housewives. He scored many episodes of that show.
Oh, well, there you
How
go.
dare you, Desperate
But I will
Housewives.
say, you say it's the best thing about the Transformers movies. You could call the score mediocre, and it would be probably the best thing about the Transformers movies. So you did a very good job of articulating that it was much more than mediocre. But
I don't know.
I should say the best thing about the Transformers movies is a low bar. Let's
I think
get
those
that.
racist
No, that's fair.
sidekick-
Yeah.
I don't know. I think those racist sidekick Transformer ones in the second film
That's a
are
good
actually the
point.
best thing about the trilogy.
What does it say about the writer strike that's what came out of that?
I think they were a little
Racist
angry. I
robots.
think they were a bit angry.
I think they
We
were
could do
like,
a whole
you know how to
pod-
fuck
like
Michael
podcast
Bay over. I'll
about
tell you
the
that.
old writer strike, and who knows what's going to come of this one.
Oh yeah, the
God
old writer
knows.
strike.
Yeah.
How it affected Quantum of Solace as well. And they had to write that mid-shoot. Daniel Craig was actually writing that movie alongside Mark Forrester. That was not a pretty picture.
Listen,
Yeah, no,
the DCEU and the MCU already have enough problems on their hands with all their casts. I don't think they need any more problems behind the scenes. That's for sure.
Yeah, probably not.
No, yeah, probably not. At any rate, using Steve Jablonsky and Transformers as inspiration, as well as the countless score talk that we've had over the years. It's been quite a bit. It's one of my favorite, if not my favorite, categories that we do for our own award show, and especially at the Oscars. Do love talking about some film score. So with this episode, we're doing our film score Mount Rushmore of sorts. But to, I guess, lay it all out, I'm actually going to toss it over to Jay, because he's the one that kind of came up with this idea, and he has fun labels for everything. So Jay, explain what we're doing here.
Sure. Okay. So, this spawns from JD's adoration of scores, and I think we all love a great film score, but JD adores a great film score, and so we wanted to pay homage to the OG at InSession Film and say, you know what, it's time. Let's objectively determine the greatest film score of all time. This is official. This is going into the Library of Congress, I believe. And
Aren't some of these scores already in the Library of Congress, though?
I'm sure
I think
plenty of them
I'm saying I think some of them are. I mean, at least we know some of these movies must be that we're going to talk about.
Oh, for sure, definitely.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And this was a really fun thing to do, not just because of the kind of the competition of it all. And if you want to turn, we always make fun of turning art into competition, and yet here I am just like, let's rank, let's bracket, let's go, let's do it. It's fun to have these arguments on kind of an individual level. I think it's very fun. And essentially what we're doing is I got everybody, all four of us, to give what they consider to be their 4 favorite scores, the 4 best scores ever. And we're essentially going to turn it into a bracket. And every person is going to have their own region, and we'll run through them as we go along. And I've given each region a nickname. And one of the most fun parts of this is kind of figuring out what do people love about film scores, because I think I kind of nailed sort of a very high level theme of what each of these.
There are
regions
tonal
kind of represent.
commonalities between each of us and what we tend to like.
Yeah, which I thought was very cool. And here's how the voting is going to work. So for every region, let's just do a for example. We will have our first region. We're going in alphabetical order. It's going to be Brendan's region. And in his first matchup, everybody but Brendan is going to vote on which score advances. So, you got 3 there. There's going to be a majority rule. It's pretty straightforward. Then when everybody has a finalist in their region, we get to 4, and there's no easy way to kind of make that work from a voting perspective. So what we're going to do is each person is going to throw together a preferential ballot of all the scores that aren't their scores.
This is more convoluted than the Oscars.
Look,
shit.
I don't know about that, but
I mean,
it's the best we can
preferential
come up
ballots
with,
and committees.
and it's gonna be
Lord,
it's
are
gonna
we
be fun.
electing
I
a
mean, I don't know.
president
It's
tonight?
the best I could come up with. I made a whole
Should we
spreadsheet.
explain
appreciate
preferential
it.
ballot to listeners just in case?
Sure,
But
sure,
let me-
yeah. So
a preferential ballot. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to go into that. I was gonna go like this long.
Look, it's
95
very
minutes.
straightforward. A preferential ballot is you rank the scores as opposed to voting for the best, and that's the vote. You go 1, 2, 3. Highest vote gets 3. Second vote gets 2, and your last rank gets 1 point. So then you add up the points, and that's it. It's fairly straightforward. So
pretty easy.
That's
Wouldn't it be a
That's it.
4, 3, 2, 1 situation?
No, it's only going to be 3 because you're voting for the ones that aren't yours.
Oh, that's right. Oh, okay.
So it's just 3.
I get it. I get it now. See, it's late and there's numbers.
So I mean, we could
Imagine how
theoretically.
Imagine how difficult it would have been if we actually tried to seed each of our picks rather than
I wanted to
drinking
avoid
tonight,
that. Yeah.
How bad this would be? I mean, like, I think drinking tonight would increase. Like, I think that's a really good score.
That's a
I mean,
16
feel free
seed.
to,
That's a
Ryan.
1 seed.
Yeah. Well, if Ryan gets up and leaves the show, we know where he's going. He'll be back with a few beers. Hopefully he'll
I'll be right back. I gotta make a martini. So
so I'm very excited for this. I think we can go ahead and jump into it now that we've laid out all the rules and what we're doing. And as Jay talked about, we're going to jump into Brendan's bracket here.
All right.
Do we want, I don't know if I'm the one that should, come out and say what the name of these regions are, because this is a Jay special as well.
This is a Jay thing. I feel like he's got to take ownership in his creativity here.
To be fair, he stole all
I feel
these
like-
ideas from me, but
I kind of feel like we should let's lay the groundwork here. Let's go through each of our regions. Just give the names first. I'll give the names of the regions that I kind of deemed this is what this region kind of represents to me. So let's start with Brendan. Brendan, go through your 4. I have decided that Brendan's region is called the Dreamy region. So Brendan, run through
It
yours
is
and
kinda
let's see if the
dream-
audience agrees with this.
It is kind of dreamy now that you say that. There definitely is maybe a more ethereal quality to the scores that I picked that I dubbed as my quote-unquote best. But the 4 I have for my appropriately dubbed dreamy region include the score for Ridley Scott's Blade Runner from 1982, the score courtesy of Vangelis. I also have John Williams's work for E.T. the Extraterrestrial, also from the same year, 1982, going into the 80s here for my first two. For my third pick, I kind of went a little bit of a surprising route here because it's not my favorite Ghibli film, but if I had to pick one score, I would probably go with Joe Hisaichi's work for Spirited Away. And it was the first one I heard. It's very sing-songy. I love the jazzy components to it without actually being a jazz score. Just from a compositional standpoint, it's very intricate. And of course, you can't talk about the best scores without at least acknowledging in some capacity the great Bernard Herrmann. Of course, working with the likes of Hitchcock, but that score for Vertigo from 1958, I can't listen to it on its own without just feeling completely uneasy. That is the sign of a great score doing some type of work and heavy lifting there. So that's the dreamy score. That's the dreamy category, the dreamy region here.
The irony of Spirited Away, I didn't say anything in our group chat, but I did chuckle to myself a little bit. And really the only thing I can do is encourage people to go and listen to Brennan and I's review of Spirited Away last year.
It's a very good movie. Very good movie. It's not my favorite Ghibli film. It's not my favorite Miyazaki film, but from a musicality standpoint,
it is a good score, though.
I think it is. I think it is perhaps his most melodic movie. And
we're
that's
getting ahead
why
of
I picked it
ourselves.
here. Yeah,
But, yes.
I would totally agree. Listen to that episode and just shake your head the entire time.
You could do that.
That's
a lot of people
great
did.
movie.
It's pretty much
A
what
lot
I
of people did.
Pretty much what I did.
It's a good.
All right,
It's
let's move on.
good score. So.
Let's move on to JD's region, which I have dubbed the Legends region (parentheses) and John Powell. So JD, let's run.
All
right.
Let's run.
Five.
He found very
Okay, we're gonna be here
disrespectful,
for
but I think
10
it's
minutes
legitimate.
just talking about John Powell now.
Speaking about when I go get that alcohol break. I'll be
Listen,
back.
John Powell is a legend, and I am going to goddamn fight for that. The scores that I have here, I think, are pretty self-explanatory for the most part. So I have Star Wars, and that might be a little bit of a cheat because honestly, I'm considering the entire canon there. How to Train Your Dragon,
So we're going
of course, the John
Star
Powell.
Wars, not just the original trilogy, not just the original film. We're just going Star Wars.
Star Wars, all of it. Yeah, that's where I'm coming from. So I mean, you guys can debate that if you want
I think that's
I'm
fair
just letting
because
you know.
Ryan has something very similar.
Yeah,
Well,
he does.
I mean,
Well,
yeah, we'll talk
we'll
about
get
it.
to
We'll
it. We'll
talk
get
about
to
it.
it. But
Okay.
you have one pick that's not solidified of just one film. We'll say that.
yeah. I mean, I could pick one if you want me. If you
Well,
put
you
gun
don't
in
need
my
to.
head, but you know,
If JD's going to just pick Star Wars, you don't need to pick one film.
I know, but you know. Anyway, no, I'm sorry, JD. I'm stepping all over
No,
you.
all good. All good. Yeah, we'll certainly get to that. So yeah, Star Wars, then the legend John Powell with How to Train Your Dragon. A lot of great scores from animated films. That's
Sir John
one
Powell.
of the big ones for me. Hans Zimmer. Gotta love a good Hans Zimmer score. I'm going with Interstellar.
This is
I think
freaking
is an all-timer. And similarly to what we were saying with Brennan and Spirited Away, the irony of how
Okay.
I feel about that movie.
There's a big difference between Spirited Away and Interstellar and how we feel about those movies. Like Spirited Away, we
Perhaps.
at least really like.
For me, not
Well,
so much.
yeah.
You know,
I
they're pretty
mean,
on the same level.
to be fair, you know, because I'm not sure what you rated that on Letterboxd, Brennan, like maybe a 4 out of 5.
Spirited Away? Yeah, I gave it a 4 out of 5. But
Yeah,
Interstellar,
so-
I give like a 2 out of 5.
I'm at a 3.5 out of 5 with Interstellar.
Okay.
So the disparity isn't that much, but there's certainly a disparity.
You
there
talk
for
a
sure,
lot of
'cause-
trash for that being a 3.5 out of
Yeah,
5.
that really hurts.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of why I'm so disappointed because there are elements of it that I deeply love, including the score, that the frustrations of that movie are mountainous. It is like going through wormholes. That's how gigantic my frustrations are.
To be fair, they do that in the film.
They do that in the
That's
movie.
true.
But yeah, so like it just emphasizes my frustrations more because there's so much about that movie I love.
Interstellar
Anyway.
commentary from InSession Film coming soon.
It's gonna happen. It's
Yeah, we're gonna-
gotta
yeah.
happen.
Eddie and I are going to sit down. We're going to do it.
Yeah.
It's going to be great. Because
But what of those great things?
It won't be
It-
argumentative at all. You know,
Not at all. Not at all. But there will be a lot of things we do appreciate and share, and Hans Zimmer is one of those. I think it is an all-time score and his best work. And then the last one I have on here is also a score from Bernard Herrmann, but I'm going with Taxi Driver, his work there with Scorsese. So those are my
I
four.
almost picked that one for mine, but that is a great score.
So the legends and John Powell, also a legend.
All right,
All right,
who's
let's
next?
move on
I
to
think
the
Jake.
next region then. That's me. It's a me.
It's a
So
you.
Let's get on to mine. So I called my region the expressionistic region. I think most of my scores are very showy and very at the front of their films. And those films are my beloved Mishima, A Life in Four Chapters from the great Philip Glass. I have Once Upon a Time in the West from one of the legends that you could have replaced John Herman with, Ennio Morricone,
You mean
Oh,
John
yeah.
Powell?
or John Powell. Sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah. John
I
Herman.
couldn't even remember his
different
name.
guy.
That's how much of a legend
He actually is like a construction worker down the block.
He has other great scores too.
He's actually coming to fix my fence next week. He's like, John
That's
Herman.
not true.
Oh, you ever play a fence? It's good. It's good.
Nice.
Make some great scores.
555. That's his number here in town. You
No.
can,
I
fix his fences and he
then
does
you have. All right. Anyway, my next one is The Piano, 1993. Michael Nyman. Michael Nyman, not a guy you think of as, you know, one of the legends of all time, but that score to me is immaculate. And then I also have a Hans Zimmer score, but my choice is The Thin Red Line. So those are my four.
Yeah. Wow.
So Ryan, let's
great.
move on to your region,
Ryan.
which I have deemed the epic region, which you will see the reasoning for when he goes through his films. But I thought that was a very interesting theme.
Yep.
Yeah, it was one that really didn't. I was Jay and Brendan and JD were like, pick four right off the top of your head, and I was like, well, this one, and it was very quick.
It was very quick. We should also
was
say
like-
that we did treat this first come first serve, and Ryan was the first to have all four of his picks
I was like,
solidified. I'm not
if I had
mistaken.
all four, is this okay? And then I was like, boom, ready to go. Let's go. It wasn't like, try not to overthink it. Just put it like, just go, quick. So
Which is also to say, and I don't know if this is different for you guys, because Jay noted earlier, like he asked for us to give our four favorites of all time, our Mount Rushmores. As much as I love my four, I don't know if that's a true list for me. It's very possible that
I'm the same.
there's
I-
crossovers.
It's fair.
I kind of did it the same way that we tried to do our what was it, our director series or our directors ranking of sorts, and we had everyone vote all of our followers and stuff like that, and tried to be a bit objective with it. I kind of balanced it out a little bit.
Yeah.
I was just I just kind of thought, what are the four I want to hear right now? And,
understandable.
and what are the ones I listen to, and which ones slap? So I picked these four. All right.
Yeah.
You got your Johnny Greenwood for a little movie called There Will Be Blood. Heard of it? I bet.
Yeah, it's
you
pretty
have.
good.
Small movie, I think.
Pretty good. There's this other movie. It's from this guy named John Williams. Raiders of the Lost Ark. Ever heard of that one?
Wouldn't that have been funny if we got through all four of our fours and no one had John Williams anywhere on their list?
I don't think that's humanly possible.
I mean,
Not.
yeah, that would have been. Well, no, Jay doesn't have John Williams.
Well,
right?
not saying everyone had to have it, but what if
three
no
out
one
of
had
four
John
of us do? Yeah. I'll go ahead and I'll read off a little stat here. There's three composers rather, who are listed multiple times. Those are Bernard Herrmann, Hans Zimmer, and John Williams. And John Williams has three. So
Yep.
Yeah.
And I feel like if
surprise, John Williams
Yeah.
on mentioned multiple times on the greatest scores of all time list.
and if you
One of
asked
the-
me to guess the three, I feel like that would be the three.
Yeah.
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 That's what I would.
I feel like Jurassic Park is right there, but
Yeah, that's fair. That's right up there. I mean,
we're talking about the composers.
I'm talking about the
And-
composers.
And
Yeah,
as far as
Zimmer,
composers.
Williams,
absolutely.
Herman. Those would be the three.
Oh yeah.
I think
Okay.
at the very least, Williams and Zimmer for sure.
Morricone could be up there.
Morricone was
Morricone, yeah.
was
Yeah.
one I did consider. He was
Maybe
like,
Giacchino could have been up there too. Yeah.
all right, Johnny Greenwood. There Will Be
Instead,
Blood.
he has 0.
John Williams. Hey, John Williams for Raiders of the Lost Ark. You got a little bit of a wild card, right? Maurice Jarre for Lawrence of Arabia,
Yeah.
right? Ever heard of
Pretty
that
cool.
movie? It's pretty epic. All
Yeah.
right,
A little bit of an epic.
be a little animated
Yeah.
here. It's epic. All right.
Yeah.
And here
The,
is
the
my-
horizon is not in the middle.
damn right.
No, it
It's
is
not a
not.
Flash movie. All right. Okay. And then my last pick is we did deem this one movie when we did our favorite films of all time. I did, and Brendan co-signed it with me, technically on that.
I know. Yep.
It's Lord of the Rings, and that's Howard Shore. That there's and I was like, boom, Howard Shore. Now if I had to pick one, I could, but I'm not going to because dims the rules. All right. So, and I also thought about, I listened to a lot of these at home, but then I also think about when I first saw them, some of these on the big screen. Then obviously Lawrence of Arabia, seeing that one, in the last couple of years on the big screen,
Sure.
and just what it that rush of emotion, like that, like the drug of a score, right? JD knows what I'm talking about. He's an addict for it. You know what I mean? He's tapping up. He's ready to go. You know what I mean? Because the rush of a score can really just drive a movie, especially
It
for a
can
lot
save
of
a
these
movie for a lot
can
of
save it.
Yeah.
It could drive it.
Transformers. Yeah.
Yeah, it can
Yeah.
it can make you move to absolute puddle of guck. You know what I mean?
A
So
puddle of guck.
yeah.
All right.
I love
JD,
it.
we're making a new InSession Film T-shirt with T Public,
puddle
and it's
of
going to be
guck.
called a puddle of guck.
There you
I
go.
love it.
It's just a puddle in my glasses. That's all it is. You know what I mean? So,
Is that
but
an
yeah,
actual saying, puddle of guck? I've never
is
heard
now.
that before.
it is now.
yeah.
Absolutely
mean-
not.
It is now. I'm
I
coming up
just
with
tried
things.
typing that into Google, and that is not what came back.
Yeah, I
Urban
bet
Dictionary
it's
thought it was a
not.
different word.
Uh-huh.
I mean, however you want to articulate that, though, I cannot echo that enough. I think that's what I love about film scores. I mean, the music itself is often compelling, but what the purpose of it is to help enhance the experience cinematically and in a lot of cases emotionally. And you guys know me, I'm an emotional person. I wear them
No.
on my sleeves at all times.
No,
So
absolutely not. Not true. Fake
Yeah.
news.
A score being able to immerse you in the film in however way, but especially emotionally, that can absolutely be a big driver for me. So it's often why I go back to them, and it doesn't have to be like a sorrowing feeling. It can be an enthralling feeling. Like when I listen to the score for Interstellar, like it gives me goosebumps. I think about that moment of McConaughey trying to contain the spin and like how gripping that scene is. Like I just absolutely love it. Or you think about Raiders of the Lost Ark and all the great stuff there. So it moves you in all types of ways,
And especially in movies like, let's say, Raiders of the Lost Ark, where I don't even really recall there are many moments that the score isn't even operating, right? Like there are only very few scenes in that movie where there is no music from John Williams. And sometimes a consistent score like that is why a film has such an urgency to it. Like it's not just creating a musicality element and a sense of emotion. It's also coupling with the editing sometimes, and that's also really fascinating about it.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely. So, anyway, are we ready to begin, fellas?
Let's do this thing.
Let's do it.
Let's do this.
Let's get to the
Okay.
Brendan region.
All right, Brendan, talk about your scores. What do you got here?
The dreamy region. Once again, Blade Runner, E.T., Spirited Away, and Vertigo. So I guess I kind of got a little ahead of myself talking about them initially, so I guess I'll be repeating myself a little bit as to why I think these are such great scores. So what's the plan? Do we each just go through all 4 of them and why we picked them, and just kind of go from there, and then we how's this? How do we plan on working this?
I think we can just kind of go film by film, talk about them, and then at the end we'll vote.
Yeah.
That sounds fun. Cue next season, guys. We'll be here for hours. I mean, I'll start with Spirited Away. I know I'm getting a little bit out of order, but I already did start talking a little bit about Joe Hisaishi's work in that film. And like I said, it's not my favorite Ghibli film. And to be honest, it might not even be the score from Joe Hisaishi I listen to the most. That might be Princess Mononoke, if I'm being honest. And I think it's just because of that main theme.
Yeah.
But, you know, I sort of alluded to this when talking about something like Raiders of the Lost Ark, which we'll obviously talk about when we get to Ryan's region. But there's something about Spirited Away and how consistent that it is, and how each individual melody, it actually feels like a soundtrack when you think about it. Like each component feels like its own separate song. Like they have this melodic propulsion to it. And I love musical scores that almost operate like a soundtrack without literally being a soundtrack. You can add words and lyrics to the entire experience of Spirited Away, and it feels like an album. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about it. And I think Hisaishi's use of it's not really chordal dissonance, but he operates like a jazz musician without really playing jazz music. There are some really tricky things he's doing compositionally that I just absolutely respect, and no one is doing anything like him. So Spirited Away, I think, might be the best musical experience from Ghibli, even if it's not my favorite film from that lovely studio. And of course, with Vertigo from 1958, I mentioned how Bernard Herrmann's music there, you can't listen to it without feeling some sense of like anxiety.
No.
And you know, it's not even just that. You know, they're like the opening credits alone. It's almost
The
piercing.
opening track is incredible.
It's so good.
Yeah, but it's kind of melodic. Like there are a couple love themes sprinkled throughout the film that are actually like kind of romantic, which is this weird counterbalance for what the film actually is and how ahead of its time it is. That's a film that apparently people didn't like when it first came out, and I think part of the reason why could be the music and just how piercing that it literally is. So I just absolutely respect the hell out of that score for being as abrasive and ahead of its time that it is. Of course, E.T. the Extraterrestrial by John Williams. I mean, it's iconic for all the reasons we talked about. It's also iconic for being one of the most uniquely designed scores in its final act by editing itself into the movie in a very different way than most often. Most often, composers compose and edit and create music over a finished product, whereas E.T. sort of went the other direction. The film in its climax was edited around John Williams' score because the melody and the phrasing of it was just that good. And that's another thing we talk about. It's not just the melodies themselves and how they're performed, but the phrasing and when pauses are put in. And there's something about John Williams' work there that is, it requires those specific moments to breathe. Not just the fact that there are moments that breathe. It's the moments that he chooses to pause the music and let things simmer. And the movie had to react to that, which is so interesting. Yeah. Lastly, Blade Runner, Vangelis. Part of the reason why I picked this one, it's also very varied. You know, there's a lot of variety in this score. There are some lovely themes that are very film noir in many ways, which certainly match the influence that the film is going for. But from a synthesizer standpoint, it's so ahead of its time when you hear what that film is doing, and you think, oh man, if young audiences watch this now, they might be thinking this sounds like Uncut Gems or this sounds like Good Time. It just we're hearing almost like this resurgence of what Vangelis was doing in movies like Blade Runner. It's becoming a very common like indie thriller kind of thing. So Blade Runner, I think, is a very influential score for those reasons. So yep, those are my four, and that's why I picked them.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that there are scores that you guys picked that if I was considering a true Mount Rushmore for me, there would be some crossover, and Blade Runner is one of those for me.
Would you have picked it if I didn't get to it first?
Probably, yeah. But I would
probably
intentionally
would've
let you
too.
guys go first because I wanted to sift through when I had plenty of other options. I mean, the four I'm going
That's
to
the
talk
thing.
about, I love. So
Yeah, that's the
you
thing.
know.
It's not like we're running out of options if someone goes first and takes something that you want. It's like I almost
No.
picked How to Train Your Dragon, JD, and then I knew
Yeah.
he's gonna take that one. I'll let him have it.
I mean, I let you guys have your say. I wanted to be able to look at what you guys picked and then, kind of go from there. But Blade Runner is certainly one of those scores for me. And I love how immersive it is. The music, there's something about its soft qualities. And again, I'll reiterate, as I noted in my Steve Jablonsky piece, I am not a musician. I don't know the technical jargon. I don't know anything
That's
about
true. We
music
should just
theory.
go with Brenda's
I
bits.
cannot articulate it.
I'll just pick the winners. I'll just pick them all.
Yeah, exactly.
Good night, everyone. Please rate, review, subscribe down
See,
below.
guys.
You're listening on iTunes. Give us a review.
Nah, the Fender Precision bass here is just for show. I don't know what I'm doing with it.
Yeah. But look, I'll reiterate that. All I
Actually
can
mine.
speak to is how it works for me, as a layman. And I think that, like the somber, soft qualities of that score, I think are really great. And I think what's fascinating about the soundtrack when you listen to it on Spotify is that the dialogue accompanies a lot of the music. And so you get a really great.
Yeah. It is kind of a narrative.
It
score in
is
many
like,
ways.
yeah. I love that. I love that the soundtrack is composed that way. So while, yes, you get to listen to a lot of the music separately from the dialogue, but you really get to also experience how that music, which is great on its own, how it just works so seamlessly for how that film is written. And then you consider the aesthetics of it and just what that film is doing tonally, and it's impeccable. It's absolutely fantastic. And that final track is probably top 10 for me all time.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's great.
Tier
And
for
I
mine. Yeah.
and I will say, you bring up an interesting point there, which is there are some scores that work really well in the film, but not really when you listen to them devoid of the actual narrative itself, and vice versa as well, where
Sure.
I think of the score for The Last of the Mohicans, which I think is a great score, but I think it kind of overwhelms the movie.
That's
like,
fair.
Listening to it on its own, I think it's fantastic. And then there's something like Dunkirk, which I don't really think is a great score to listen to on its own, but it works so well in the movie. So that's a really interesting point that you made there. But let's get to our matchups here. There was no particular seeding done, and I feel like we might have just spoiled maybe our first matchup here, talking about how we might have picked them for our own brackets if they weren't on this one. But I'll be honest, it is a very tough matchup. So JD, Ryan, and myself will be voting on the matchups in Brendan's region. And the first one, no seeding, just sort of randomly put his four in the bracket. The first one's going to be Blade Runner versus E.T. Ryan, I'll go to you first. Who you got?
Oh, yeah. I think these are all four great choices. I like the score for E.T. I think it's a very good score. Obviously, very sweeping. Obviously, when you think of sort of the end sequence, it's really like the ending of that movie is very much carried, I think, by Williams and sort of the magic of what he can do there.
And
but
the end
for
credit
me,
song is spectacular.
yeah, it's spectacular. But
that
for me,
piano motif and everything,
Yeah.
I have to go Blade Runner. I think it's so evocative, so ahead of its time. I think the things that when we saw that movie, I think we saw that movie 2 years ago, Jay, because we were talking about that on a movie series for the Riddler.
Man, was that long ago?
It's which also really sucks because then you think about it, you're like, man, I haven't seen Blade Runner in 2 years.
That's
I really
crazy.
need to watch
I've
it
actually
again.
been really hankering. I almost put it on the other day. But it's one of my faves.
It's just one of those that too, like aesthetically, it's from I think all of our lists, it's one of those that really sticks out, and I think it's a very special score, and it goes so well with the story and kind of these characters and everything. And I think Vangelis is, I mean, obviously rest in peace. passed
Yeah,
away
yeah.
last year, I
Recently
believe.
deceased, yeah.
And just it is a true master score for sure. And it's very tough to dethrone for me, John Williams, who is a goat for sure. But when you do have a score like this, it's pretty hard to beat. So I'm going to go with Blade Runner here, boys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one isn't particularly close for me. I do love John Williams. I love E.T.
Oh man.
I mean, that, I mentioned earlier Tears in the Rain being one of those all-time tracks for me. That flying track, Chase, whatever it's titled, I think it's had a couple of different names at this point, but I mean, there are few scores that are more iconic than that one. And it's incredible. Like in terms of what I was noting earlier and how these film scores can tap into the emotion of a film, that one is quite exhilarating. For me though, on the whole, especially if I compare E.T. to other John Williams scores that I love, and again, this isn't as much a knock on E.T. as much as I think there's more
celebration
depth
of Williams.
to other John Williams scores that I love. And for me, that's really the distinction here. I just feel like from top to bottom, Blade Runner is a more distinctive, well-rounded score, where the E.T. one for me, as great as it is, and when it's at its peak, it's, again, all time, but a little uneven for me comparatively. So E.T. is great. Again, don't get me wrong, but Blade Runner to me is just one of those all-time scores that I love for the reasons I mentioned earlier.
These are my 4. Should I feel a sense of disappointment if it doesn't go the way that I want?
That's very interesting.
It is. I mean, I've often cited E.T. as I think the greatest movie score of all time. So as much
It's
as
so tough.
I mean, I picked these 4 for a reason. I mean, I'm not disappointed that Blade Runner is making it over something else, but man, I feel bad for that little creature that's just looking to go home.
I love E.T. It's wonderful.
That bastard was going to come back and kill us all. So, like, to be fair,
now I just want to hear that theme in a minor key and see how different that it is.
You could be the one to make that happen.
We'll
introduce it here on the podcast.
Jay?
I'm going to go ahead and make it a sweep. Obviously, Blade Runner already through to the next round, but I'm going to make it a sweep. I do love E.T. I adore that film, and I adore Blade Runner. And the thing about a John Williams score is, obviously, you're going to be able to hum it better than you're going to be able to hum whatever score that it is up against. But there are two very different types of scores too, because Blade Runner is such a sort of there's a coldness and a mood setting as far as
very
Blade Runner is
despondent.
concerned, whereas E.T. I say this as a compliment, is a manipulative score, and John Williams is the master of the manipulative score. And again, I say it in a bad way. He's really good at it, and he makes you feel exactly how he and Steve Spielberg want you to feel in those moments where his score is blasting.
Yeah.
But
he's tapping into like
Blade
childhood
Runner for me is kind of a more
and all those pressure
100%.
points.
But for me, Blade Runner is a more unique achievement, and that's going to be my vote. So Blade Runner advances. Brandon, let's go to your next matchup here. Spirited Away versus Vertigo. This is an interesting one. Again, two very different.
I have a
scores. So,
I
JD,
have
I'm
a
gonna throw it
hunch.
to you first.
I have a hunch. I think I know where this is going to go, but everyone say your piece.
Okay.
Well,
JD?
this is a tough matchup. Spirited Away is a great score. Vertigo as well. I will go Vertigo here, though, and I think a lot of it comes down to, honestly, similar reasons. I think there are moments within the soundtrack with Spirited Away, again, comparatively, which is ultimately what we're doing here, where it might lull slightly for me compared to Vertigo. And Vertigo, interestingly enough, I feel like when people talk about that movie, the score is perhaps one of the least talked about things of that film.
It really shouldn't be.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. So, I mean, even though I have a different Bernard Herrmann score on my list, I mean, this is one of those where given what Hitchcock is trying to do in that film dramatically, the score is so vital to that film's success, and it's so immersive. And I feel that one a little bit more, even though the main themes of Spirited Away are much more recognizable and great. Again, don't get me wrong, but Vertigo, I think, gets the slight edge here for me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I'll go next here, and I'll go to Spirited Away, which is a score that I find to be extraordinarily profound, much like the film itself. It is, like you said, Brendan, it's surprisingly varied, and I think it's a film that really has an intense control on what the film at large is trying to say, moment by moment, scene to scene. And it is such an emotionally potent score, and one that, I mean, I love the tingly pianos of kind of certainly the intro. I think about the intro of that movie as well as the intro of Go, which again is immaculate.
That opening
Spirited
track
Away is kind of a
sorry, but that opening track, apparently, I think it's called One Summer Day. No, not a Vertigo, of a Spirited Away you're talking about. The opening track.
Yeah, Spirited Away.
Yeah, the opening track, One Summer Day, I believe if you go on Spotify, that might be number 1 or number 2 of Joe Hisaishi's most played songs. So that just kind of goes to show the power of that.
Not surprising.
Yeah,
because
not surprising.
Because it really does just set the tempo for that entire film. So, I mean, in addition to all the other things, when you get into kind of the fantasy world that we get into in that film, some of it gets much more bombastic and much more fantastical, and that all of that is equally effective and equally evocative. So I'm going with Spirited Away here. So Ryan, we got our first tiebreaker.
Gosh. Pressure.
You can't go wrong, though. Honestly,
I can't.
I
can't.
Win-win.
You can't.
No, I can't. But I mean, I have to go. I have to go with my heart here, and I have to go with Vertigo.
Oh man! Again, I'm kind of disappointed because I often cite E.T. as my favorite score of all time, and I often cite Joe Hisaishi as my favorite composer of all time. They're both left off.
I will say also for my vote, which is now irrelevant, my Herman score is Psycho. That's my Herman
also
score.
good.
I like how JD was like,
think,
you have to. It's hard. It's unfair, but you sort of grade them on a curve because they have so many fantastic scores. But for me, it's like Psycho is my number one.
So that's fair. I think that
unfairly kind of knocks it a smidge.
Fair.
I mean,
yeah.
I don't think that Spirited Away is it's like a top 5 or 6. Well, it's probably top 5 Miyazaki film for me. I mean, to be fair, the master is extraordinary at his job, and the movie is fantastic. But JD kind of made a really good point, even though he was talking about Vertigo. I don't think a lot about really the score of Spirited Away when I think of that film, as much as I do other films from Miyazaki. I even think of of Totoro at times, and obviously Princess Mononoke, so even there's moments of Porco Rosso that I think about a lot with the score there, and even weirdly Castle in the Sky came to mind when I was thinking about scores.
They're certainly more
from
sweeping,
Miyazaki.
so I think they have more moments to really kind of be in the forefront for sure.
Exactly, and so and I get it's more in the background, and it's still fantastic work. Don't get me wrong, but I just think about Herman's score in Vertigo and how it is so purposeful to build the tension, is side by side with Hitchcock there, and it's very patient, and it's I think right up there with Psycho in my opinion, because the reason why those movies are so well regarded is because all the elements add up to give an experience that feels, in this case, very tense, very evocative, very there's something about the Vertigo score that even also feels dreamlike in a lot of ways too, like what we were talking about with Blade Runner. And I think it's one of the greatest films of all time. There's no question about that. but there are just sequences I think about with the score being evoked, some subtle, some big, and they leave an impression. So I had to break this tiebreaker. Damn it, I hate being the tiebreaker person for this, but it's but yeah, Vertigo.
I often
was
hum the
tough.
score to I often hum the score for Vertigo to myself every time I wake up from a nightmare.
Yeah, well, I don't. I mean,
An insight into the mind of Brendan Cassidy.
our session's over, and you know,
I just
we'll
want our
touch base.
listeners to get to know me. That's it.
There you go.
No, that's good.
All right,
That's
let's
good.
move
Good
on
stuff.
to the Legends region and John Pell, and
Also
go to JD. JD, let's run through your 4 scores here, and then we will vote.
Yeah, I do like how Jay pitted up How to Train Your Dragon against frickin' Star Wars. Yeah, what a fair matchup that is. Not that any of them would be fair, I
To be
guess,
fair, you
but,
put anything against
little
Star
bit of
Wars.
juggernaut.
Is it
I think
yeah.
I think I just put them up in the order that you had them in the text. To be fair,
which is fair. And we
believe that's what I
did
did.
admit
Man,
to
Could
Jay.
you imagine if it was
Random, yeah.
Backseat Driver and
exactly.
Star Wars? I mean, that would be pretty cool, right? I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah. At any rate, my first one here is Star Wars, and I don't know if there is another score across a series of films that have hit the zeitgeist more than this one. And I mean, where do you begin with this one? There are so many tracks that are instantly memorable when you think about the main opening titles that we get in all of these films. There's of course the Imperial March that we get in the sequel, and then even when you get to
Jabba's
Phantom
Palace.
Menace, yeah, there's that one. You get to Duel of the Fates is instantly memorable. Yeah, exactly.
I was just gonna say, say what you will about Phantom Menace, but if I were to rank all of the Star Wars films just based on their scores, I might say Phantom Menace is my second favorite.
Yeah,
I thought if Brendan was going to say favorite, I was going to leave.
No, I mean
So that was-
it's hard to say that when the one that did it first is still
yeah,
right
that was-
there.
yeah,
It's-
whew,
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
Hey.
the thing is, Empire did the Imperial March, so I feel like you have to go Empire.
And Han and Leia's
Y-
themes,
Han and
there,
Leia's themes,
and Yoda's
Yeah,
Yoda's.
you know, and
I guess there's just something about Duel of the Fates, that track
It's
specifically.
so good. It's
yeah,
it's brilliant.
it's a
It-
brilliant track.
the fact that they almost named Episode 9 that title. I mean,
Should have.
Yeah.
they
Would've
should
been a
have.
better
They
title.
really
They
should
probably
have.
should.
That would be a
Yeah.
sick
Would have been a better title.
That would be a
It would
Probably
be
would have
so
been a
good,
better.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've read that spec script. Would have been better than what we got.
I believe it. I believe it. And then I just think it's interesting that, 30 years after the originals come out, they decide that they want to do another trilogy. And, again, say what you will about those movies, but John Williams certainly comes to play. And I absolutely adore Rey's theme. I think it's just as memorable as anything that came before. And I just find it fascinating that all those years later, as John Williams was getting up there in age, I mean, when he did The Force Awakens, he was 82 years old, something to that effect. And he still is throwing out bangers in that franchise. And, and it just speaks to the legacy of it and the prowess of him as a composer. And it's interesting, we're here talking about all these different scores, and we're certainly going to mention other works of John Williams we already have. We could have an entire podcast talking about this, like the scores just from these movies. Like you could do a whole essay just on the brilliance of them. And the one that I haven't even had a chance to mention yet, which is my favorite, I think, is the Force theme. As simple as it is, but to me that is so defining of the franchise, and it's used so impeccably within the context of those films and the heart of it and what defines Luke and the choices that he makes throughout a lot of those movies, and even getting into the prequels and what we see with Anakin and how it's utilized there as well. And there's something about it melodically And again, I can't articulate it, but there's something about those chords up against those visuals and what those films are as it relates to the Force and this spiritual essence that courses through the veins of those movies that I just find so moving. I mean, I have found myself at times, and I do want to reiterate that while I do love Star Wars, I think it's become very clear and obvious over the last 6 or 7 years that I love it for very different reasons than the larger fan base does. Like, I don't necessarily love it for all of the nerdy lore that comes with it. I mean, all of that is certainly fine, but I'm not going to get all up in arms because, you know, a certain filmmaker does something I don't like. I think there's a lot to like in all of these films in one way or another. But what I love about Star Wars really taps into, especially that original trilogy, you know, taps into, again, that spiritual essence, overcoming something that seems impossible because it speaks to something that is so deeply human as it relates to relationships and people that we love and fighting for them. And that progression in the Force theme, I think, is borderline profound in how it taps into those ideas. And I get the feeling of all of that when I simply listen to that track.
Sure.
I think it carries a lot of weight. So, you know, honestly, if you guys sat there and said, I'm voting for this over How to Train Your Dragon just because of the Force theme, I'm not going to get mad.
or just because, you know, it's Star Wars.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, there's a lot to love about the franchise in terms of these scores and what John Williams brings to them. They are masterful. If I was voting on my 4, obviously I'm not based off these rules, but probably gets my vote of these 4, if I'm being perfectly honest. Okay, How to Train Your Dragon. I am a firm believer. I've said this before.
You better talk long about this because this is the only time you're going to get to talk about it.
Fair. Look, I expected that. How to Train Your Dragon. I am a firm believer, and this might just be tinfoil hat conspiracy. This might be myopic of me, but I wholly believe it. And I've said this 1,000 times. I'll continue to say it. You swap out the logos at the beginning of that movie and it says Pixar instead of whatever it says. I think people consider that trilogy to be among the best of the animated genre we've ever seen. Those films are elite with a capital E. They're fantastic.
Those films are great. Yeah,
they're fantastic.
They're really, really good.
Yeah, you can make an argument that How to Train Your Dragon 2 is the best animated sequel ever made. I will certainly die on that hill.
Amazing.
It's so good.
Yeah,
I do love 3.
good.
The first one's fantastic as well. To me, that's just simply one of the best, one of the most daring, one of the most nuanced trilogies. I don't care what form of cinema it is. One of the best trilogies I've seen.
I don't love the third one, but I have to still give it credit and a pass because it sticks the landing. And that's what a trilogy ender still at least needs to do.
Yeah. I really like it a lot, and especially agree with that notion. Now, that aside, we're separating the quality of the films from the scores. John Powell was born to make the music for those films. They are freaking incredible. I almost swore.
Such an outlier in his filmography. When you look at what he has worked on, it is so different.
It is. But man, do I love it. And, you know, obviously, like, you know, the 4 of us, I was listening to a lot of these scores. And once I listened to the music from your guys' brackets, I went and listened to, you know, some of mine. And, you know, the first one I went to was How to Train Your Dragon. And it didn't take long. I geeked out immediately. These scores are so incredible. I love the bombacity of them. I love the emotion of it. I just love the texture that John Powell brings to these. Forbidden Friendship, another one of those all-time tracks for me. I cannot listen to that and not get emotional. Test Drive, also fantastic. Yeah, absolutely incredible what he is able to do with the music in those films. So, I mean, animated movies have given us a plethora of great scores that we could certainly choose and pick from. And I love Joe Hisaishi as much as anyone else. You know, what we got from Michael Giacchino, or really a lot of the Pixar scores, I think have been very, very good.
Thomas Newman,
very
didn't
memorable.
mention him yet.
Yeah. Inside Out is one of those all-time scores for me as well. But How to Train Your Dragon for me, and I think it similarly to Star Wars, it's how he progresses them, how he continues to evolve them over the course of all three. To me, is just special, absolutely special, and I love it. So, How to Train Your Dragon will not make it to the second round. Star Wars will obviously, vote it out. But
I like how you're already picking that for us.
look, I accepted it before we hit record, so like it's perfectly understandable. Like I get it, but I absolutely want to champion that score because I think it deserves every bit of recognition amongst the crop and the quality of scores that we're talking about here tonight.
Yeah, for sure.
Then there's Taxi Driver, Bernard Herrmann, another one of those that, like Vertigo, it immerses you into the world that Scorsese creates there so impeccably. There's something about it that that feels like I'm walking through New York City at that time, where it's a little dirty, a little grimy, a little uncertain. And I love how the score is able to kind of evoke all those qualities throughout. And it's also one of those that for me, because that's, it's a movie that doesn't necessarily evoke bombacity or these like memorable themes. But that one I feel like is kind of memorable. Like you might not be able to hum it per se, but you can hear it in your head. And I think
it's the tone, right?
Yeah, the tone.
It has a certain style and a certain genre, but there's something. It's hard to explain. Like you hear it, you think, okay, this just reminds me of the urban grime of New York City. It's the sense of place that it provides.
Absolutely, and I love the consistency of that throughout the film, and how he's able to invoke that specifically. Is great. And then there's Hans Zimmer with Interstellar, and we talked about how I feel about that movie on the whole, but Hans Zimmer's work in this film I think is absolutely exquisite, and so different from a lot of the scores that we had heard from him up until that point. It's organ driven, which is interesting in and of itself, and how it accompanies both the emotional crux of that film and the largeness of it, I think is incredible. And I think that to me is what I find so, like, I don't, like, I almost can't explain, like, there's almost like a spiritual sense to it for me, because with where that film goes from a spatial perspective, it's something that we'll never get to experience, obviously, but Christopher Nolan,
it's kind of heavenly,
it's
right?
Heavenly, yeah.
Yeah, and now we're certainly not, like saying that it is this or it's promoting this. It's up for the listener to decide, but it's almost church-like. It kind of remind that the use of that organ is a huge component in making it feel that way.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And given where we're going spatially, to kind of tap into those kind of hypnotizing qualities, those kind of heavenly qualities, I think is really great. And again, not just with the emotion of it, but I think about some of the dramatic urgency of that film. I mean, this is probably a little hot takey. I don't know. But that the scene in that film when McConaughey has to kind of contain this spin, that is honestly I think that might be a top 3 scene for me in Nolan's filmography. I love it that much. And a lot of
what's so frustrating about the movie overall, right?
Yeah. And I think, and a lot of it is Hans Zimmer's work there. I mean, the way he's able to carry the weight of it, it's Matthew McConaughey's performance, even Tar's in it. There's weirdly a little bit of humor in it as well. And just Nolan's control of it tonally, I think is just masterful.
What happens if he docks him?
Impeccable.
What happens if he docks him perfectly? Nothing good.
Yeah, it's great. I love that. I love that. So like you feel the weight of it, you feel the urgency, yet there's somehow that humor also works. McConaughey's great. The visuals are just masterful. So, you know, like I think about that all the time. And that track, No Time for Caution, I believe is the name of it, is absolutely mesmerizing. So I love that score. A lot of people also, you know, I think Cornfield Chase, I believe, is the name of it. I was trying to think of the name of it. That's another popular one that has hit the zeitgeist from that film. Like you get on TikTok or Instagram Reels and start scrolling, you won't get very far before someone has utilized that track. Because again, I think it speaks to this innate emotion in us and how people like to utilize it for whatever they're trying to articulate in their videos. It just speaks to us on such a fundamental level. And I think that's why I love that score as much as I do. So I kind of rambled on there, but man, I love all four of these. And here's my guess before you guys go. Star Wars, Taxi Driver. That's my guess.
All right.
Interesting.
Well, let's get down to the voting then. Star Wars versus How to Train Your Dragon. Let's go quick on this one. Ryan.
All right, I'll be back in 5 minutes, guys.
Rio 2.
Let's just get on to the Taxi Driver Interstellar debate.
I just want
Star Wars is good.
I do want to say that I don't think Star Wars is perfect. If we're taking it as a collection, I don't think it's perfect. I think that a lot of the stuff in Attack of the Clones is a little bit forgettable. I think that a lot of it is reused, obviously, especially in the sequel trilogy. There are new themes that are brought on, but there is a lot of reusage. Some great, some not. Rise of Skywalker is a soundtrack that I couldn't remember any originality, but that's just kind of the film's whole fault.
Not his best work. But I mean, so many franchises have that kind of that same problem.
I understand, but we are just judging it on the whole and just putting it out there and making the case for laters and all. That's all. But I will say that I mean, like, you know, there are so many. I mean, this is the thing about John Williams that we have yet to talk about, but him and Zimmer are the ones that I know now to be the ones that have these concert docs, or the you pay a ticket and you go see their entire,
which I've done. I've seen Hans Zimmer in concert,
live performance of their entire thing, and Zimmer literally does it. I know, you know, obviously Williams can't do it too many times because of the fact that he's an old man. But I mean, anytime you see a clip online of like John Williams with this giant orchestra and he just walks up there and he's a real old man or whatnot, but he's just like, he gets that baton in his hand and he just goes, huh, 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 and you hear dun 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 dun, and you're like, oh, okay. My childhood's here, everybody. And so yeah, it's Star Wars and the dragon sequence. I mean, the How to Train Your Dragon music is very great. Those flying sequences are incredible. I mean, if you don't know, haven't we used some of the How to Train Your Dragon stuff in our intros and stuff in the past or stuff?
We've referenced them before.
We've referenced them, or we've had stuff in the past. But I know, JD, how much they mean to you, and I mean, it's not the greatest animated, you know, franchise of all time and everything, but they're definitely the best scored of all animated franchises, that's for sure. But it's sadly, my friend, it's just not Star Wars, you know.
No, and that's fine. And if I was gonna push back against anything you said, it honestly has nothing to do with How to Train Your Dragon, but I kind of love what John Williams does with a lot of the prequel and the sequels, and honestly, I think some of it can come down to this simple notion: what he did in the original trilogy is so great that to repurpose it later on would be kind of dumb not to.
No, I mean, no, that's fair. Yeah, no, I mean,
I mean, there
I
are
think
there are
Revenge of- I
7
mean-
songs that any movie fan can hum off the top of their head from Star Wars. It's crazy.
At least
Yeah.
7. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, can I ask? And does anybody know? Maybe this is a rabbit hole thing, but is he also responsible for the Cantina music? Because if that's
I'm pretty
the
sure.
case,
Yes,
I'm
yes.
pretty
that
sure.
would be another one. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's also
you
him.
kind of think about like,
It
holy
was on
shit,
the- it was
even
on
he
the
did that.
soundtrack. I listened to today was credited to him. Yeah.
Well, there you go.
So there you go. He's
There
done
you
it
go.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know what genre of music that that song is? Canonically?
Pop?
No. you just call it pop.
I don't know. I'm waiting for something random. I don't know.
No,
What do you?
It's
What is
rhythm
it?
and blues. Rhythm and blues.
It's called
Okay.
Jizz.
Oh,
Oh yeah, I do remember hearing that, and no wonder I forgot about that.
I was. Yeah. God damn it. All right.
It's what it's called. I don't know what to tell you.
Vote
Am I gonna
for it,
have to
Canon.
bleep
We
that
can
out?
move on.
Well,
I don't know. Whatever.
just after that, yeah, Star Wars gets my vote.
anyway.
Star Wars gets my vote as
Interstellar,
well. Let's move
Taxi
on to the
Driver.
next
Let's
one.
move on to that.
Taxi Driver, Interstellar. I'm just providing you facts about the Star Wars canon, gentlemen. I don't know what
Yeah,
to
no,
tell
he's
you.
not wrong.
Yeah.
He's not wrong. We asked
That's true.
weirdly
Yeah.
for it. So
Taxi Driver, Interstellar. Brendan, you go first.
You know, there's two sides of this because we already have Bernard Herrmann being represented because of my picks there
True.
with Vertigo. So if Bernard Herrmann ends up winning again, we will have a Hermanoff.
Nothing
That's
wrong with
also
that.
in the
Love a
jizz,
good
man.
Herman
Like
off.
that sounds like
Yeah.
a Russian general.
Yeah. I think we need to patent that phrase or that term there, Hermanoff. So, do we have a Hermanoff or do we go with Zimmer here just to change it up a little bit? You know what? Since I'm going first, I can't be blamed if it goes in a direction that people don't want to see. So I'm just going to pick the one that I think it should be, and that is Bernard Herrmann for Taxi Driver. I
Okay.
did mention it earlier because when I picked my four,
Yeah.
I almost did go with Taxi Driver, and it's such a different score for Bernard Herrmann. It's also just something that I respond to stylistically from a genre standpoint. It's absolutely rooted in this like urban New York City grimy jazz music, and
Yeah, I
that
was
is
gonna say it's kind of a little jazzy.
well,
yeah.
it absolutely is, and I'm a huge
yeah.
fan of jazz music, so it's just something I enjoy listening to, regardless of its association with Taxi Driver. I can listen to that soundtrack and feel like I'm listening to a classic jazz album from the 1970s. So I love it for those reasons as well. It's just more all-encompassing for me. And to be perfectly honest, Hans Zimmer has done other scores that I prefer over Interstellar. So, like if I were to look at, let's say, The Lion King, for instance, I would take that. So, and that's not a knock on Interstellar. I think it's the best thing about that movie, and his work on it is wonderful. But my heart's telling me Taxi Driver. I prefer that score. I think it's better.
Okay.
Jay,
Well, that leads to a very good question, Brendan. Are you jizz or jazz?
I am definitely jazz. I'll say that right now.
Very
I am jazz.
Understandable
I am jazz
if
as
you
well, which is
don't.
why I am going to clinch this one up for Taxi Driver. I think it is a tremendous score and one of those that is at once a great piece of music for the film it is in and just a great piece of music in general. I think it is really great in and of itself, as well as very much of a piece with that movie, which is all about this somber reflection on New York in the 1970s, very new Hollywood, very early-ish Scorsese. So that's my pick, Taxi Driver. Ryan,
Okay.
this is an irrelevant vote, but what do you got?
it's irrelevant at this point, so really doesn't matter. So I can hold the floor as long as JD was talking about Interstellar. So I will. I think Hans Zimmer's best score since Lion King is Interstellar. And I think that his work here is the best work he's done with Nolan, his frequent
I agree.
collaborator. I think that I am the most positive of everybody here of this movie. Shocker. That the two that don't like the movie didn't pick it. But I will say
The score is great. The score is great.
And also,
Score is very
I am
good.
objectively also the biggest Scorsese fan here too. Probably, most likely.
I like how you
love
said
that man.
objectively, probably.
Probably, kind of, maybe.
I
It's up for
I'm the guy that
interpretation,
thinks
really.
he's like the greatest American filmmaker, right up there with Altman. But
But we
I-
don't feel that way? Is that what
no,
you're implying here?
absolutely not, absolutely not. Shut your mouth.
Honestly,
no.
bum.
But
Bum.
I mean, and that's the thing. It's like I made the argument, and while it is a good score, there are 50 other things about Taxi Driver that I think about because that movie has so much on its mind, and it's such a conversation piece. And yes, that score is great. Don't get me wrong, Herman's work is fantastic on it. But again, there's like 50 scenes and 50 points and 50 conversations. And I remember when Sophia and I were talking about it, I was like, I think the score came up like one of the last things we talked about because we went on for like an hour and a half talking about that movie. It was a long, dense movie to talk about. And I think that Interstellar's not nearly as dense as Taxi Driver, but it is an interesting film to talk about. But I think of the best scores of the last 10 years or so, Interstellar's up there of the modern scores. I'm glad that it was represented on someone's list here. Thank you, JD, for that. Because I think of the fact that I think Interstellar is a better film than Inception. And I think one of the key components, I'll let you talk. And I think that a lot of it is because like the sensibilities of the score from that film are used here in much more poetic and emotional ways, especially like the sort of piano that's used, the organ used a lot in space and to really provoke this fear and this anxiety of this mission that they're on. And I think that I think McConaughey's performance balanced with it is impeccable. I think the docking sequences, like you mentioned, are incredible too.
Yeah.
There's just a lot within that score. It's almost like you can see Zimmer behind the organ as like a madman, almost like giving you this kind of score. And I like that it's a little different. That's why also I like the Dune score because he's putting those bagpipes in there and he's trying different things rather than just
Love
like
that one too.
Brahms and brooms, you know what I mean? Like different stuff like that. He found a different instrument and tried to incorporate that in there. And so I like Interstellar a lot. And I think that the music really helps out its emotionality and but yeah, it doesn't matter.
I gotta edit
sorry.
these later.
I'm sorry at the 14-minute mark.
Hey guys, let's talk about coffee. You love it. I love it. You need it. I need it. So if
So
you're going to
good.
drink it, you might as well get the best. Am I right?
Oh, yeah. Isn't there a study that was performed that even just the smell of coffee is enough to reduce stress by a certain percentage,
I
at least
hope
in
so.
adults? I've heard
I
that.
would believe it.
I mean, that's why we need our coffee to taste as good as it is, to be as artfully and organically crafted, because even just the aroma of it is important, and a good
Yeah.
aroma is necessary.
And you know that the aroma for Coffee Call is great when I open up the package and my 7-year-old son is like, that smells real good.
And kids are not supposed to like coffee.
Which he's never had coffee, but Sam does love the smell of my coffee. So there might be a lot of merit to what you're saying there, Brendan. I certainly would believe it.
Oh, man, if that's not a selling point, I don't know what is.
Yeah. And of course, the aroma for coffee cult coffees are great because they only source specialty grade Arabica coffee, meaning that this is gourmet premium coffee. They inspect every single bean that they use. They don't use anything that is less than specialty grade. And that's why, the quality is great. A lot of coffee companies will use specialty grade, but they'll mix it with lower grade beans to make it cheaper. Therefore, you're spending $5 for a bag at the store, but it turns out you're getting a mixed bag. Some good, some not good. Do you want a mixed bag?
Is it literally called a mixed bag? Because
No, it should be.
Yeah, it really should be.
Yeah, it should be. But Coffee Cult doesn't use lower grade coffee, so even if the price point is a little higher than, let's say, another company where their name begins with an F, you can find them in grocery stores. You're getting great
I don't know who
coffee.
that company is, JD. I think you might have to give me. Can I buy a vowel or?
It
or something?
rhymes with Smolgers.
Oh, okay. So it's like
What's
a
the
Lord of the
mantra?
Rings sort of coffee thing. All right.
What's the mantra to live by? You get what you pay for. You get what you pay
get
for.
what you pay
That's
for.
true.
Absolutely. So yeah, Coffee
If
Cult
you
might
buy
be-
cheap, you get cheap.
Exactly. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And on top of that, Coffee Cult likes to source coffee from farms that pay its workers fairly and equally, especially the women workers. That's important to them. They don't like to use chemicals in their coffee. They do everything the right way, everything organically. They roast to order, so you're not getting anything that's stale just sitting around in some warehouse. And I know they wait for you to order, then they roast it. I mean, how many companies are doing that?
Not many.
Flourbucks isn't doing that. So
Okay,
freshness.
what the hell?
guaranteed.
Okay.
Look, I'm just trying not to get tagged here on YouTube. So
I'm almost tempted to just say the name anyway, but okay, we'll keep going.
at any rate, there's a lot of different blends, some single origin coffees that are really, really great. And right now, go to coffeecult.com. That's coffee with a K, cult with a K, coffeecult.com. Use our code ISF and get 15% off with that code. Again, that's coffeecult.com. Use our code ISF and get 15% off. The InSession Film Podcast is brought to you by our great friends over at First Time Watchers. Right now, we're in the middle of talking about some of our favorite film scores of all time. I'd be curious what First Time Watchers votes would be for that. We'll have to ask them the next time we see them.
I'd be afraid to hear what their answer is.
Tim's got Geostorm.
Yeah.
Tim's got Geostorm on the list.
Geostorm. Something Gerard Butler related.
Yeah.
Or, if it's their mantra, they'll pick a film or a score that no one's ever heard of, but
That's what I
could
was thinking.
secretly be great, but that's what makes their show a lot of fun.
Yeah, they're a great supporter of our show. Definitely a podcast you have to check out. Tim, Walter, and Hermano are your three hosts here. They have a very musical knowledge of film. I guess we can say, keeping the theme kind of a brewing here, but it's a great knowledge of film nonetheless.
Yeah, on their latest episode, they talked about the Italian crime thriller Big Guns.
Yeah, speaking of something you never heard of.
Exactly.
Unless this is like a secretly popular film and I'm just ignorant towards it. But
It could be that.
I don't know what this is.
I don't know either. I have not seen it. Curious what the film is like, what the score could be. We'll have to ask him about it. But you can go listen to the thoughts on it. It was actually a really compelling conversation.
God, it's such a unique show, picking out movies like this that they've never seen. And a lot of times it's of this ilk. Ones that we all collectively here as we plug their show go like, what the heck is this? They had a cool conversation, but I've never heard of this movie. Fun, right?
Yeah.
But it's always a great conversation. And if anything, with a lot of these films, some of them are pretty good according to them. So they're helping to promote underseen films like that, which makes their show even all the more unique. They'll also discuss some movies that they've caught up with that might be worth noting and maybe even more popular. Maybe even some movie trailers that are worth noting as well.
Yeah, they give out some recommendations at the end of their show that I would urge you to pay attention to. And overall, the show is very smart. They bring their big guns every single week. So with that said, Brendan, where can we find them on the internet?
Firsttimewatchers.podbean.com. Hit them up on Twitter at FirstTimeWatchers. Also on Facebook, First Time Watchers.
Yeah, go subscribe to them on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. When you're there, please leave them a review. Let them know how much you love and adore their show. At the end of your review, we ask that you leave a little hashtag so they know we sent you to them. This week, let's go with the hashtag Big Tim. I like it.
All right.
Yeah, he's the one
Big
carrying
Guns
the big gun.
Hermano. How about that? I like that.
Ooh, that's a
Better,
good
actually.
one. Big Guns Hermano. That's a great one.
Yeah, I like that one.
That's it.
Yeah, leave that hashtag. We promise they'll love it. Go check them out. Again, that's First Time Watchers.
All right, so that's the last.
It doesn't
Anybody's going to talk
matter.
about Interstellar. On to my region,
Taxi
the expressionistic reason. And you know what? I'm going to be a little more brief with my descriptions of these scores.
None of these
all
are
right,
good.
So my 4 scores. First one, and I think the biggest hurdle this one has on facing it is that I don't think everyone has seen this film, and it is Mishima: A Life in 4 Chapters. Philip Glass,
I have.
one of my favorite composers. I think about his score both in this film and in Jane as well, the documentary from a few years ago. Just an incredible score, as well as in Koyaanisqatsi, his music in that film.
Oh my gosh,
I mean,
yeah,
he
that's
is
a great one too.
he is incredible, and he is also one of the most like forward composers in all of his films. He has very boisterous, flamboyant, ubiquitous scores that are very essential to all of the films that he works on. And this one especially is so much about these varying tones where you have these real worlds and then these representations of 4 stories that are sort of metaphorically connected to the real world scenarios and the real life of Mishima himself. And so that one to me is, if you ask me my number 1, that's it. It to me is the most transcendent film score that I have ever come across. Just one man's opinion, but that's my first pick. My next one is going to be The Lead Can't Leave. He Only Showed Up Once. Originally, I listed The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is probably his most iconic score, but I changed it to Once Upon a Time in the West because I think that film or that score has a little more subtlety to it. And I mean, it is still at times very big and very emotional. And as my region is called, very expressionistic, and very much using its power to evoke certain emotions from the viewer. And it can be so tragic, and it can be so epic, and it can be so adventurous and triumphant. It's just this wonderful blend of all sorts of different emotions that he imbues across that entire film. Next one is The Piano, which is a film that I love and a score that I love from certainly a composer who is not one of the guys you think of when you think about the quote-unquote great composers, but Michael Nyman does incredible work in this film, which is unsurprisingly pretty piano heavy, but it does also bring in some strings and even some wind as well, and it is really just so evocative, just to use that word over and over again. But it propels that narrative, it propels the themes of that movie, and it propels the emotion of that movie in such a powerful way. That is an incredibly powerful score. Another score that's very much at the front of its movie, but is so effective, because I think that is a really hard thing to do. If you put your score so at the front of your film and it's bad, it tanks the entire movie.
Absolutely.
It really can.
Yeah.
And so when you have a score like that is so essential to the film, and it is so omnipresent in a film, and you're able to really make it work in the way that it works in The Piano, I think that's a really special thing. And my final one is going to be another second Hans Zimmer score on our bracket, and maybe not the one that most people would expect, but I'm going with The Thin Red Line, which to me, that's a film that has this really unique tone that is so full of dread, but also has kind of this, I don't know if you want to call it fairy tale, but maybe this spiritual energy to it. And what Zimmer has to do is capture both of those tones, and he really does an incredible job with that. And you have Jim Caviezel in this film, who is kind of this innocent, who you need to understand as this person who understands not just the nature of war, but nature's relationship with war. And that is one of the most distinct parts of that film. And I think Hans Zimmer really does a great job of sending that message to the viewer. And that's a score that absolutely you can listen to that outside of the film, just listening to it every day in your headphones, in your car, really works. Just incredible pieces of music.
Yeah,
So
agreed.
those are my 4. Let's move to the matchups. We got Mishima. We got Once Upon a Time in the West. Ryan, let's start with you.
Oh, Jesus. Oh my God. Jay, I love you, but I also really hate you right now. I think that this is
This one's tough.
outside of my own.
Yep,
This
yep.
might be the toughest on the bracket so far for me. Jay knows how much I love Ennio Morricone, but he also knows, because he's converted me. We are a Mishima house here, and we stand Glass's score, and then
Very much so.
truly is. I mean, Jay was like, "You got to see it. You got to watch Mishima. You got to do it. You got you've got the Criterion Collection Blu-ray. You just pop it open and watch it and watch it. It's got beautiful cover art. Do it. And I was like, okay, Jay, fine. Just, put my family down and I'll watch it. It's okay.
Put the gun away.
And I watched it, and it's a beautiful film. Oh my God. If you have not seen my favorite Facebook follow, Paul Schrader's Mishima Life in 4 Chapters, then I highly implore you to do so. But then there's Morricone, Once Upon a Time in the West. That's such an iconic score, such an iconic movie, one of the greatest Westerns of all time. I think I'm going to give the edge, though, to Glass and Mishima Life in 4 Chapters. And I think the reason why is that you did the switch, Jay. And I think you gave me a little bit of an out, because I agree with you. I think the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly score is the superior score
It's fair.
of
So
Morricone.
iconic.
It's so iconic. I mean, there's literally like Jordan commercials and Sprite, using for that final. You know what I mean? Like it's so iconic. And there's a lot of, and you're right. I think that Once Upon a Time in the West, it's more subtle, even though the movie is definitely a larger scope than anything that Leone had done up to that point. But there's just something truly unique about Glass's score in Mishima, and it's that dreamlike quality I was talking about with Vangelis in Blade Runner, but it's also definitive because of it feels it flows because of life flowing, and it fits perfectly within the chapters in the story. And I mean, that's probably Schrader's best film, and
I agree.
and it's impeccable work. So yeah, I'm gonna stick my neck out for Mishima.
Okay.
I'll jump in from there, I guess. I think there's a lot of irony here, Jay, that you chose, or randomly, I guess, pitted these two films against each other when you originally had The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly as opposed to Once Upon a Time in the West, because when you and Ryan did your Sergio Leone movie series on Extra Film, what was that, last year, maybe 2 years ago or something like that?
2 years ago, I think.
Yeah,
at this
yeah,
time.
2 years ago, I
Yeah.
think.
The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly at that time was a first-time watch for you, right? And I
Correct. Both of
recall,
these
I,
were,
re-
yeah.
I recall you commenting on your experience watching The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly for the first time, and hearing that score and going like, "Oh, that's where that's from."
I think that was
that's where
yeah.
that's from.
We both had that.
The reason why I bring that up as kind of an irony is I did finally watch Mishima. The movie rocks. It's amazing. And I had that same reaction hearing Philip Glass's score for the first time. I'm like, I've heard that before. Oh my God, that's from
because
the
of the
Truman
Truman
Show.
Show?
It's yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So, I guess for that reason alone, because of that similar shared experience of the I guess, the iconography of that score, I do think it has an edge over Once Upon a Time in the West. Now, if you kept it with The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, I might go differently. But in this case, given this particular matchup, I am going to go with Mishima.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Mishima advances. JD, do you?
Mishima advances. I'll try to be quick with this, but it's fascinating, these two films. I don't necessarily have to reiterate why this is a fascinating matchup, and I agree with everything you guys were saying about Once Upon a Time in the West and the subtleties of it. It's still extremely recognizable though as well. I will say though, I have not had a chance to see Mishima quite yet. However, I did go and listen to this score though in preparation, and I had such a fascinating reaction to it because I put on that first track and you start to listen to its melodies, and I start to vibe with it. I'm like, okay, I see what's going on here. And then the next track, okay.
How about a hard left turn?
Yeah. Yeah. And then you get to the next track, and it's so interesting to experience those turns, especially out of context, because I have no clue how any of this accompanies what's on screen. But I had such a captivating experience just listening to the music that I would vote for Mishima on that alone. Maybe that's a little disingenuous since I haven't seen the film yet. I don't know. But if I was to just talk about the scores individually, and again, as much as I love Morricone and what he did in Once Upon a Time in the West, my vote certainly goes to Mishima, and I am deeply excited to go and watch this now.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Mishima advances.
Awesome. Well, how about the piano and the Thin Red Line? Kind of a unexpected matchup, I think, a little bit.
This is getting hard.
Two
This is getting
great,
hard.
great scores. Brandon, you go first then, since you think it's difficult.
The Thin Red Line is one of my favorite Zimmer scores. I actually think it's very underappreciated. I will say, I think between the two, the piano score is more of a character in that film. And there definitely is something to be said for that. But we also talk about the importance of a musical score and how it carries the theme and emotion of a film. And in some cases, I don't think Terrence Malick is as good if he doesn't have that sonic thing to help drive his movies. And that's not to discredit him and what he's able to do on his own, but you can only make a film that's so fluttering without any music, and it really accomplishes very little. So the fact that Zimmer is doing so much emotional and thematic heavy lifting for that movie, and on top of what Malick is already doing for that film, it's my favorite Malick film for a reason. I think Zimmer is also a huge component to it. So I'm going to go Zimmer, Thin Red Line for this one. Yep,
Zimmer for me as well. I absolutely agree with that. There's something, you made a great point earlier, Jay, that when we think of Zimmer, we think of his loud bombacity, and that certainly comes in various forms. I love that about Hans Zimmer, but this is a very different score. It really has those kind of more elegant qualities to it that fits that kind of spiritual mold for Malick. And if you've seen a Malick film, they're poems first and foremost. And yes, the visuals are a big part of that, but also the music in all of his films are equally important. And if the music can't help carry the weight of that, then it becomes a very disjointed experience, because it is working as this evocative poem first. And it's just so different for Hans Zimmer that it's absolutely up there as far as one of my favorite works of his as well. So yeah, this is easily my vote here.
Wow, I'm honestly surprised that one won this round. But Ryan, are you going to go the same route?
Give it a sweep. Good old Hans.
I would have voted the piano on this one. So this is a real Brendan situation.
Piano's very good. I do agree with Brendan. It is very much it feels like a character. And man, if I'm somebody, Jay knows this from dealing with me for years. I love it when like a technical element becomes a character, and I latch onto that just as much as anybody
Yeah,
else.
it's a good point.
But man,
Jaws,
Thin Red
anybody?
Line, it's one of Malik's best films. That's saying a lot because a lot of Malik's films are really his best films. And I think what's so memorable about that, is when it's kind of just what JD just said. Like the most memorable bits of Malik end up being his images and the sounds that are used within his films, in particular the scores. And I think about that for Tree of Life. I think about that for this
Hidden
film.
Life?
I think Hidden Life, especially, a
God,
couple
Hidden
years
Life
ago.
is such a good score. Oh, man.
Such
Yeah.
a good score.
Yeah.
It's really aged well that I gave that the winner in 2019, I believe. So, so it's underrated. Zimmer. I don't think people talk about it nearly enough because it doesn't have like a superhero attached to it or something. You know what I mean? Or it's in the desert with Denis Villeneuve.
Ooh, let's get that conversation started.
Yeah.
No,
Nice work.
later.
Nice work. Rabbit hole.
Yeah.
All right,
I mean,
so
he does a lot of
Mishima and the
populist.
Thin
He does
Red
a lot
Line.
of populist stuff. I'm just saying it's.
He does.
Well, he does a lot of stuff that his
subtle
name is
stuff.
attached to that apparently he doesn't actually work on. It's his cronies.
Like
but-
Winter's Tale. Does anybody
anyway.
remember that Zimmer score?
I mean,
I remember not hitting the music in that movie.
What a slapper!
It probably
Anyway,
is the best
anyway,
thing about
anyway,
it. Let's be
anyway.
honest.
Mishima, the Thin Red Line, Advance, Ryan. Let's move on to your region, the Epic region. Run us through your nominees.
All right. So we'll start off with probably the most unique of the epic ones here, but still very epic, and that's Johnny Greenwood's There Will Be Blood. I almost went with Greenwood's work on Phantom Thread, which I think is just as equally fantastic.
So elegant.
And elegant, but then dark. But I also thought, like, man, I don't get that score, and I don't get his work on Power of the Dog or Spencer, without this,
Sure.
or The Master even without this. And I think that this is truly.
Say Radiohead shirt.
There you go. There you go.
Nice work. I was wondering what
truly-
that was. I couldn't see it all.
Revolutionary stuff, in my opinion. I think that we talk about a score that builds tension. This is definitely one of those. I mean, from the opening shot, the way the movie opens up, you hear that the screechingness of the score open up, the playfulness, of the strings, the dun, 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 you know what I mean? Dun, 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 and it's epicness there. But then, when the well blows up, which I think is an extraordinary scene, but what is it? Is it a, I don't know what he's using there, but that clicking sound though.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure what percussion instrument he's using there. It could be like it could be
Call it a wood block.
Wood block or
there's a
something.
wood block there. There's a tambourine in there somewhere too.
Yeah, and
I think.
it just will get your heart racing more than a marathon. I mean,
wasn't
it's incredible.
that piece the reason why it was ineligible for an Oscar nomination? I think
something
that
along
might
those
be the
lines.
piece. I think that might be the piece that was originally written for another movie.
It might have been, but he then brought. But it's still his work, and he brought it in there.
It's still his
I don't
work.
know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying the eligibility
No,
is fair
yeah,
or not.
no, it's stupid Oscars. That's why the
Dumb
InSession
rules.
Film Awards
Yeah.
exist. But I think it's masterful. I think it's also has brought upon one of the greatest collaborations of the modern era with him and Paul Thomas Anderson. Even like there's not much of it, but his couple of tracks that he has in Licorice Pizza are incredible as well there too. So Greenwood, that score, There Will Be Blood. Howard Shore, Lord of the Rings. It's kind of along the lines of like JD's pick. This is very much my childhood. How many different themes are in this movie that
A lot.
not only are bombastic and wonderful, but also break my heart. I think of the sequences in Rohan, the sequences with Gollum, the sequences with the Fellowship and Fellowship of the Ring. I think of just the beginning when you see the Lord of the Rings after Cate Blanchett's narration early on, the you know what I mean, and it's in you know, then all the stuff with Mordor and dun 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 dun, you know what I mean, and it's truly just like, honestly, Jake picked the perfect word. It's epic storytelling. So you need to have an epic score to go with it. But then there's the subtleties of the music with the hobbits and Frodo and Sam and their journey as well. You know, the when Legolas and Aragorn and Gimli, when they are racing after on their own missions and everything. But then there's also the meditative and almost religious and just hymn, and the like, almost like it's like hymns, or these it's almost ghostly quality of the elves as they're passing on and everything there too. There's just so much. It's so rich with so many different moments of score that Howard Shore's music is just, it's so essential to Lord of the Rings. And so that's why it's got to be there. It's almost like Howard Shore kind of looking at why Williams's original trilogy for Star Wars is so effective with Lucas, and bringing so many different ways of identifying characters, where they're from, with a piece of music. I think that's truly fascinating. And
Sure. Yeah, good point.
And so there's that. Maurice Jarre, I mean, Lawrence of Arabia, I mean, that movie, one of the most beautiful movies of all time. But if you talk about epic, that score goes along with it. It's this man's journey through war and through finding himself. Obviously, it's a, you know, Jay and I talked about when we talked about Lean and in that series. And, you know, I got to say, you know, that there's moments I think of real subtlety here, but when it builds up and it's got those big battle sequences and everything, and even like the stuff on the train that it kicks off the second part, I think is just incredible work. And truly like one of those that I think is like, it's almost like a template for epic scores and epic filmmaking, because Lawrence of Arabia is like a movie that every director wants to make a Lawrence of Arabia. There's no question about it. They want to make their epic of their time. And then lastly, this little known guy named John Williams, making this, I think arguably his best score, his most, right up there, you know, yes, Star Wars stuff, I get that. But, you know, when Jay talked about whistling down the street, you know what I mean? Like, and you know exactly who it is. You don't have to think, oh, is that the Rebels?
You have to walk to that. Like, that is like, that is, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, that is just such a strut. Like, that song is a literal strut.
Like, and you instantly know who it is.
Yeah.
It's Indiana Jones. It's the greatest hero in film history.
Great.
And
he survived a nuclear
I'd say it's tied
blast.
with like seven other John Williams themes as the greatest theme of all time.
It is. But then also too, I mean, like, I think Raiders of the Lost Ark is Steven Spielberg's best film. I think it's John Williams' easily one of his best scores, if not his best score. I think then Indy's theme is, I mean, that's the thing about, like, you know, Star Wars is like, there's so many different Star Wars themes that are so great, but this one's so unique to Indy himself. But then you think about, you know, the traveling sequences, the different action sequences that are in this film, they're all led by this score. They're all propelled by Williams pushing it along with Spielberg, and they are such close collaborators. They really are. Spielberg trusts him to get his movie to the finish line every single time. And you know, this is still early in their time working together, but man, do they absolutely nail it. They create an epic thing that's I love what Harrison Ford, when they were doing, I think, the AFI tribute to John Williams, and he walked out to the Indiana Jones score and he goes, that damn music's been following me around for 40 years. It follows me when I go to when I go down the street. It follows me when I come to awards like this. I even had somebody playing that music right as they were about to put me under for my colonoscopy. You know what I mean? Like, that music is tied to Ford and Williams and Spielberg, who I would argue, more than Lucas in Star Wars, Spielberg is John Williams's ultimate muse. And so if there is and I will make this argument now down the road, if there is a Williams score to win, it must come from a Steven Spielberg movie. That's what I truly believe, because of the fact that I think one of the greatest directors of all time. I'm just saying, one of the greatest directors of all time. His movies don't nearly work without one of the greatest composers of all time. And that the 50-year relationship that they've had, and the how many films? Like, what is it?
Crazy.
30 films or something like that. It's insane.
25.
It's 25 plus. You know what I mean? So
Lots of stuff. Lots
there you
of
go.
movies.
Lot of epic
Movies are
ideas.
good. Movies are good.
Movies.
All
You know
right.
what I mean?
What are we
So-
voting here?
All right, let's go with There Will Be Blood in The Lord of the Rings. I'll go ahead and start. And again, I'm wearing a Radiohead shirt. Didn't even mean to do that, given the episode. But it was
What
just
he's
right
voting
in my
for?
drawer, but that is, There Will Be Blood is an incredibly important score to me, an incredibly important film. That is, in many ways, the film that made me love film, and a large part of that was just how unique that score was, and how I had never really heard something like that in a movie before. And since then, you see kind of the influences and kind of where that came from. Although it is still very unique in its own right, in its own way. But for me, that gives that film such a unique tone and really drives home the darkness and the somberness of that film. So I'm going There Will Be Blood there. JD, where are you going?
Well, Jay's got his Radiohead shirt on. I have my Howard Shore shirt on.
Oh, yeah.
So
Do you
I-
really?
We got a tiebreaker.
no, but I'm gonna make one. I'm gonna make one.
Man, we
Put it
came up
on our
with two
store.
shirt ideas in this episode.
I'm going Lord of the Rings. And look, the score to There Will Be Blood is great. And I don't know if this comes down to what you were saying earlier, Jay, in terms of the disparity of how it works within the context of the film versus, how affecting it is out of context. There Will Be Blood is a score that I don't really listen to outside of the film, but I do think it is brilliantly layered into the movie. The Lord of the Rings, on the other hand, I will listen to all day long, and equally I think is brilliant. And I think it has a lot of the same qualities as what we talked about with Star Wars, and Ryan laid that out beautifully. So that's just a memorable all-time score, and I want more adventure scores like that. I just don't feel like we get it much these days, and Howard Shore is a goddamn master and was brilliant in that trilogy. So he gets my vote here.
All right. Tiebreaker.
I'll be shocked if Brennan goes the opposite of what I'm thinking here.
Pass.
Pass. All right.
No, Brendan.
Flip a
the
coin.
episode,
You could always
folks.
flip a coin.
This is gonna be an awkward silence. I should not have been the one to go last year. I really should not have been.
He's thinking real, for the radio listeners. He's thinking
Wow,
real hard.
What's that movie where Kevin Spacey is it called Swing Vote? Where he's the last
Oh,
man
you're
in
thinking-
America who hasn't voted?
You mean Kevin Costner?
Kevin Costner.
Not Kevin Spacey,
That's
Kevin
an-
Costner.
That's an entirely different movie.
Wow, that made that movie way more controversial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I gotta go. There Will Be Blood
Yeah, that's what I expected.
by a slight margin, and I think it's simply because of the two scores, it's the one that should not work, and somehow it does. But again, it's so difficult because I have so much respect for what Howard Shore is doing for the Lord of the Rings, because if you actually look at what his if you look at his filmography and what he had worked on leading up to Lord of the Rings, you would never think that's the guy to do your epic adventure saga like that. This is a guy who mostly got his start composing music for David Cronenberg. I mean, think about that. And he also did the score for Seven. And didn't he do the Silence of the Lambs as well? He's kind of known for some of these like kind of grimy thrillers. Ed Wood. Ed Wood. He's got a very varied career that when you listen to Lord of the Rings, you might not even think it's Howard Shore.
Mrs. Doubtfire. That's hilarious.
Ooh. That's actually low-key good score.
I mean,
not terrible. Yeah.
You just don't think of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. But I just my hunch just tells me with There'll Be Blood and what Johnny Greenwood is doing, he's composing a score for a film that takes place in 1912, I think is when that maybe 19 it's the early 1900s.
Around there.
Yeah.
That score should not work. And somehow it's, I mean, I don't know if I want to say it's the best thing about that movie, because I think that movie's a masterpiece, but it just somehow works. I can't comment on its dissonance and its weird use of chords and what Johnny Greenwood is doing, but it just works.
It evolves too over time.
Oh.
Every time you watch
That was
it.
an
So
epic.
both
That was
of
an
them do.
epic matchup in this epic region. So
We're probably gonna have a lot of listeners killing us that we don't have. Lord of the
No, I
Rings
mean that's a
fans.
tough. That's a
probably.
tough vote. I mean, honestly,
That's really tough.
When I saw Jay put that up together, I was like, "Wow,
You madman. That's what I
madman."
thought. You bastard from a basket.
Lawrence, on to the next
I'm
one.
not taking
I've
you to
abandoned
the
my boy.
look her
Lawrence
up
of
and take you to the
Arabia
Peachtree Dance.
versus Raiders of the Lost Ark. JD, let's start with you first. Lawrence of Arabia or Raiders?
Lawrence of Arabia. So
Really? Okay.
Yep, going Lawrence of Arabia here. And look, I love Raiders. I love John Williams. We've talked about him, quite extensively on this show tonight. But, I some of this comes down to my journey with Lawrence of Arabia because, I watched it the first time I saw the film. I didn't love it. And I was deathly afraid to admit that on the show.
Oh man, sorry to cut you off, JD, but I think we need to paint the picture for the audio listeners that Jay is holding a lovely poster of Indiana Jones. He's holding it in frame, perfectly symmetrical right now, showcasing his love for it.
Anyway,
Look,
keep going. Keep going.
we know
Jay.
we know what Jay's vote's going to be. No surprise. We knew that before this whole thing started. But I watched Lawrence of Arabia, didn't love it the first time around, and then Ryan and Jay talked about it on Extra Film some time ago, and I was like, you know what? I should watch that again. And then I did. I wasn't able to finish it, but eventually I did. And on that second go around, it was like an epiphany. It was like a completely different viewing experience than the first time around. And some of it is the epic storytelling of it. It certainly is the pragmatism of the cinematography and just the evocative scale of it all. But equally so, the music I found transcendent in a lot of ways. I think it's as important as anything else in that movie, especially given how long it is. You're in the desert for a long time. And yet everything about it is so engaging and given what that film is, like, it's not the kind of action that you get in Raiders. It's not that kind of adventure story. And what John Williams does for Raiders is undeniable. I don't know, there's something about it in my brain that feels like Lawrence is a little bit of a trickier score in that regard, but yet I still find it equally as engrossing for the kind of movie that it is. And so, yeah, when thinking about these two, a difficult choice for sure, but I'm going Lawrence. I'm also maybe going Lawrence here because I'm anticipating the other two to go Raiders, and I wanted to give it some love.
Such a contrarian.
Yep.
Yeah.
Jay, before we get to Brendan, what would you like to pick? Any film in particular that you?
He's going to go
think you
Lawrence here.
should-
I have a feeling.
I'm gonna go Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Okay, that's fair. All right.
Picture is
What a
choking him
surprise.
right now.
Wow.
Picture
Who
is
saw
like
that
literally
coming?
suffocating.
No,
his
I mean,
vocal cords.
I think there's a general grandness to Lawrence, but Raiders, again, a very important movie to me. Ryan nailed. I've always said that Raiders of the Lost Ark is the movie that made me love movies, and There Will Be Blood is the movie that kind of made me think about film in a.
It's like he's trying to ask for your votes.
Yeah, seriously, no
it's-
kidding.
it's-
But Raiders, I mean, I could basically,
or maybe
you know,
Jay just finally got on my board of great taste. You know what I mean? So
it could be. But
Sure, we'll go with that.
Raiders, you know, if we were watching that movie together, I could basically hum along that whole film.
yeah,
So
and I probably have to tell you to
that-
shut up because I hate when people do that.
yeah, probably. That memorability to me steals it for Raiders. So we got another Brendan back-to-back tiebreakers.
Yeah, I hate you guys.
Let's just go with Raiders and move on with our lives.
I mean, that picture that
We gotta get to the finals here.
That picture that Jay is holding is so powerful. It's
I
like-
tell you, he's
it's
gonna
like-
have a great job as one of those guys that like flips those signs on the sidewalk.
side of the
like
road.
if he ever
Oh
like,
yeah,
loses his
yeah.
job.
It's so powerful. I can't
Look
look
at him.
away.
He's very
It's like-
he's very
it's like
he's
it's-
moving it
it's like
around
The
now.
podcast listeners got to check out the video.
It's like it's
I mean,
you
influencing
just
me.
got to go to watch it.
He's
It's like
killing
it's
it.
convincing me to vote for some Indiana Jones here. It's like, yeah, I got to give it to Raiders. I have to give it to Raiders. So I call it the safe pick, but I do think it's the right one. That's
Very
not to
evocative-
knock. That's not to knock
evocative
what Lawrence of Arabia is doing musically, because much of that
No.
film's epic scope is also due to just how grand it is from a sonic standpoint. The music's great in that movie too.
To be fair, JD, I didn't make the rankings here because I think
Oh, I know.
the matchups would have been more interesting to have Lord of the Rings and Lawrence of Arabia and probably There Will Be Blood and Raiders up against each other. But I didn't make the rankings. But I would ultimately go with Raiders. But when I was trying to think of the fourth one, I just thought of Lawrence of Arabia because it's such a movie that you and I have talked about this, but like the score on a big screen matters. This is
True.
like when people talk about why seeing a movie on a big screen matters, score is a giant part of that.
Yeah.
If it is done correctly. And I think all four of these films, but like especially when now you go and you have to find these the local places playing Lawrence of Arabia during the summer or whatnot for a local
God,
festival or
seeing
something.
Lawrence of Arabia on 70 millimeter was a
It's-
religious experience.
And
I'm
that
so
score is
envious of that.
that score is
Yeah.
such a giant part of that whole almost religious like experience. But like,
One of the
It's-
greatest movies to be held captive by in a theater. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
And the
Yeah.
music is a lot of that for me. I mean, and I think
Oh yeah,
the weight of this debate for me comes down to Steven Spielberg's filmmaking in Raiders is masterful. John Williams is certainly at his best, but even if he wasn't, even if that's a middling score by John Williams, that's still a compelling movie. My experience with Lawrence of Arabia hinges on the music being what it is, because on that second go around, if I wasn't as drawn in as I was, and the music is such a vital piece of that, then my viewing of that movie doesn't really alter all that much. But it did, and the music just
That's
carries
very
more
fair.
weight in that regard, if that makes sense.
well,
Yeah.
That's fair.
Soderbergh, that really interesting exercise where he removed all the dialogue, put it in black and white, and put like contemporary score tracks over Raiders. And it's really interesting to go and watch. I haven't watched all of it, but I've watched pieces of it. Really interesting as a movie, because that is one of the most visually films of all time. If that,
Yeah.
my words were all crossed up
Yeah.
there, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Raiders advances. Okay, let's go to the Elite Eight here, and I think what I want to do here, let's have each of the people whose region it is give their pick, and then we will vote. So kind of like your soapbox reasoning behind which one of these is your favorite. So, Brendan, we'll go with you first. Blade Runner and Vertigo. Personally, which would you go for? Then we'll go around the horn and vote.
I think it should be Blade Runner between the two, and I'm not trying to knock Vertigo and what Bernard Herrmann is doing, but I just think from a timeliness standpoint and just the way that the Blade Runner score almost indirectly bleeds into the current zeitgeist of a lot of indie films these days. I mentioned the Safdie brothers and how a lot of the compositions in their films almost has a Blade Runner like quality to it. You could certainly hear the influence, and I think from an influential standpoint, Blade Runner has more of a presence nowadays. I feel like now it's the better score, and I think it's also very varied. So I would say Blade Runner, I think, is the one that should win.
Okay. Ryan, we'll let you go first here. Blade Runner, Vertigo, where are you going?
Oh man, get that origami out.
It's too bad she won't live, but then again, who does?
Here comes, he's got Jay. Funny enough, I have that poster too. I just need to get it framed. Beautiful Blade Runner poster. There's gonna be a companion one soon. That's gonna be in this house. I think that Blade Runner score is I mean, I think about it so much, and JD mentioned the Tears and Rain track. I mean, just some of the most heartbreaking music you can have with such a heartbreaking scene, and it all blends perfectly together. God, it goes every other day. I think about, is Ridley's best film Alien or is it Blade Runner? And it's like it's what a 1-2 combo. You know what I mean? It's like,
I feel like everyone would agree that Ridley Scott's two best films are either Blade Runner or Alien.
Yeah. I lean
that is pretty much a universal truth.
Yeah.
I think on like odd number days, like every other day, I think Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I think it's Blade Runner, and then Sunday, whatever, and then like the weekend I figured it out. And then
one day of the week I'll say, no, it might be Thelma and Louise, and that's only one day.
Or maybe it's Last Duel. And I'm.
But anyway, we're running a little long here, so let's.
I'm sorry. Anyway, the Blade Runner and Vangelis. I mean, just
anyway, Blade Runner. Blade Runner's. What would your vote be?
Of those two, Blade Runner.
All right, that's a clean sweep.
All righty.
Okay. All right. There you go. Sweep. On to JD's region. We've got Star Wars and Taxi Driver. JD, personally, where are you leaning?
I'm going Star Wars for the exact reasons you guys talked about with Raiders. It's the instant memorability of it. It's the zeitgeist of it all. I love Taxi Driver to death, and that score is impeccable. But Star Wars, the legacy of it, the various amounts of tracks that you can just name off the top of your head. I mean, you could go out on the street and ask anybody to name their top 10 tracks from that whole series, and they could give you an answer. So that for me carries a lot of weight. So I'm going Star Wars.
All right.
I'll start on this one, and I'm going to go Star Wars. It's just, when you think about all the tracks from that, and as essential as that film has become to not just film culture, but American culture and really world culture, shockingly, I mean, that really it is that important, really, in the grand scheme of the last 50 years of the world. I'm gonna go with Star Wars. It's kind of that simple. Brendan,
I'm gonna go Taxi Driver, just to make Ryan's game a little fun.
There we go.
I can't deny the iconography of Star Wars and the importance and the impact that it had, but I'm just gonna vote based on what my musical palette is, and I love the dark jazz of Bernard Herrmann's music there. And plus, we didn't get a chance to move Vertigo along, so I want to at least represent Bernard Herrmann in some way.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
fair. Ryan,
I didn't vote for Taxi Driver to even get into this position. So this is a pretty easy decision.
He's going with Taxi Driver. There we go.
I'm going Interstellar here in the upset.
The upset.
It's coming all the way back around through time and space and wormholes to win this whole thing. No, it's Star Wars. All the tracks. I do agree though with JD. There's one thing that he did mention. I'm not a there's two sequences in the new trilogies. The new trilogy with the new characters. Ray's theme is incredible, and it's the sign of like life of knowing that franchise has a pulse because John Williams is doing that. But then there's the scene where, and it's in The Last Jedi. It's one of my favorite scenes in Last Jedi, and there's like 10 scenes in The Last Jedi that are like my favorite. But it gets me every time, and it's when Luke and Leia are there together and talking about how Ben is pretty much to the dark side. And the score there, it's so subtle by Williams and yet evocative of the time that these two characters have had and where they're at this crossroads at the end of all of it. And the score kind of swells up a little bit when Mark Hamill kisses Carrie Fisher on the forehead, and if you don't cry during that scene, my God, it's beautiful. So yeah, I'm gonna go with the Star Wars. I'm gonna spend here's $5. Go see a Star Wars. So there you go.
All right, sounds good. Okay.
Okay.
All righty.
Next region.
Okay.
All right. Next region.
Let's go to the J region. And
The
our
expressionistic.
matchup here is Mishima versus the Thin Red Line. Yeah. It's a tough one, but if it were my choice, I kind of gave it away when I presented my films at first. I'm going to go with Mishima would be my choice. I think that is one of the most uniquely effective idiosyncratic scores of all time. Philip Glass, one of the most unique composers of all time. He hasn't done a ton of movies, so when we get a score from him, I think it's really, really special and important. And to me, it is a big part of what makes Mishima one of my favorite films of all time. And for that reason, that would be my pick. JD, I'm wondering, are you willing to sight unseen Mishima over the Thin Red Line?
This is honestly extremely challenging. Of this region might be the toughest of the four at this point in this bracket for me. But it might simply come down to the fact that I haven't quite seen the film. I don't know how the music works in context. I imagine it's great because the music itself was awesome. I loved listening to that soundtrack, but I do love Hans Zimmer. I would like to see him represented here, especially for a Malick film, and for all the reasons we talked about earlier. I do love that score. This is tough. This is real hard. I'm gonna go Zimmer here, but it's a little bit of a sting because that Mishima score is great, but I'm gonna go Zimmer here.
Okay. Brendan, who do you have?
Once again, pass.
This one's hard.
Flip a coin.
This one's hard.
Yeah. I think I am gonna go with Mishima on this one, and it's simply just due to a word that you said, Jay, when describing it. It's the idiosyncratic nature of it. It's the fact that it refuses to compromise. That's what I love so much about it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So it's when you watch it in conjunction with the film, it's at times it almost feels like every time there's a new piece of music playing, it's like it's a completely different movie all of a sudden. So the music has this. It creates a trajectory that most movies have never followed, and the music is a big part of that. So I'll go with Mishima for this one.
Okay.
All right, Ryan, tiebreaker again.
Oh man, I always have to be this tiebreaker. It's for me and Brendan tonight. I love Hans. Don't get me wrong. This was Interstellar, The Lion King. There's a lot of other ones. I love Thin Red Line. Again, his work with Malick is fantastic. But Mishima, JD, for the love of God, watch it this week. It'll change your life.
That's right.
He's going to come back and say, it's fine.
I got 2 kids.
It's fine. You know,
It's fine. It's okay.
I'll tell you, honestly,
We don't
you know,
have-
JD, with your,
I will say.
you doing your exercise is very interesting because of you not seeing the film but hearing the music in context, understanding how beautiful that score really is and how evocative it is.
The music is awesome.
When you see the film, I think you'll be very similar. You're gonna experience something that it's an underrated gym that not a lot of people talk about. But man, if you give it a try, and if you don't look on Facebook at Paul Schrader for an hour or two, I think you're gonna really like it. You know what I mean? So
hey, right now I like Paul Schrader more than most. It's me and Jay against the world.
Yeah.
In 2023,
I
anyway.
really got to watch this Master Gardener thing.
it's fine.
I love it.
It's good.
It's
better than the
maybe
card
my
counter.
favorite film. Yeah, it's better than the card counter.
Yeah, it's better than the
I would
card
agree with
counter.
that.
No.
All right.
No.
At any rate, okay. So Mishima certainly wins that region. On to the final one. There Will Be Blood. Raiders. How do we feel?
Well, Ryan, how would you
Blood and
actually?
Raiders.
That's right.
There will be
Yeah, you
blood
gotta
in
start
this
this off.
matchup.
Oh, man, what? Yeah, there will be blood to this matchup, Chase. Right. I mean, it's tough even for me to pick one. I would honestly, There Will Be Blood would be where I would go. I love John Williams' score. I think that it is his best and everything, but but like also Star Wars is already represented here. I just think that Greenwood, from modern scores, he's my favorite composer of modern cinema, and this one is a gateway drug of a score to every person our age that kind of opened up the door into cinema for the rest of our lives, and yet it still works. You find new things every time you listen to it. I would go There Will Be Blood.
Okay. Mark me down for Raiders.
Okay,
Raiders. Yeah.
Oh, you going
Black
Raiders?
and gold. Huh?
All right, JD's going Raiders.
Yep. I'm going Raiders.
No, I'm honestly surprised after you voted against it in the first round. It's interesting.
Well, I voted against both of these in the first round.
That's fair. That's fair.
I have no choice
You
but
did.
to
You're
pick one. So, and it's in same continuity as my arguments with Star Wars, so I don't want to, be counterintuitive there. So, Raiders for me.
Brendan?
Fair.
I think I'm going to go There Will Be Blood by a very, very, very slight margin.
Oh, okay. All right. I like it. I like that you were having to make JB the tiebreaker. Or
That is I kind of did that on purpose. Love you, Jay. We needed this moment to happen.
This one's tough, no doubt. I mean, it really is. Like I said, it's a battle of childhood nostalgia versus kind of this transcendent artistic revelation. And you just say those words, and which one sounds more powerful? I would say the transcendent artistic revelation, and for that reason, I'm going to go with There Will Be Blood. I think that was one that was an eye-opening score for me, and for that reason, I'm going to go There Will Be Blood.
All right.
And we
Pretension
have
wins the day. Love it.
Gentlemen, I think this is a brutal 4 here. This is tough.
It's a good 4. It's a good 4.
This is good. Oh,
and so
okay.
what
Is
we're
this
gonna
where we do our preferential
is we're
ballot?
This is our preferential ballot. We are going to go around the horn, and we're going to rank the 3 films that aren't ours, and that will determine the winner. Ryan, let's start with you. Your 3 to choose from are Blade Runner, Star Wars, and Mishima.
Let's try to be as quick as we can here.
Holy hell. Yeah, but this is also really tough.
For sure.
Because I mean they're all really different, and really going for different things. I think that I would put Blade Runner at 3, God, that's really rude.
Immediate regret.
And then I would put
Poor Deckard.
I would put Mishima at 2, and I just think because of the sheer totality of Star Wars and how epic it is and how important it is and how wonderful it is, I will go Star Wars at number 1. But that is like that's like that hurt doing that. I want everyone to know that.
Okay. I have mine,
That
Jay,
is
so I'll go
very
next.
Fair. Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Go for it.
All right. Blade Runner at 1, Mishima at 2, and There Will Be Blood at 3. That's my order.
Well, that just seems rude now. You know, put yours at 1, and then I get you know a little bit.
You know,
He has abandoned his boys.
I love the movie. Paul Dano aside.
Yeah.
All right. I will go, and I will say that at number 1, I have Blade Runner. At number 2, I have There Will Be Blood, and at number 3, I have Star Wars.
Okay.
All right, so
Comes
that
down
leaves
to
me. At number
Mishima.
3, I'll
Not Blade Runner. Mishima, There Will Be Blood, and Star Wars.
At number 3, I'll put Mishima. At number 2, I'll do Star Wars, and number 1, I'll do There Will Be Blood.
Okay.
I'm fascinated by what we're
I know,
watching.
so
happen
as Jay
here.
works
I'm
this
just
out,
watching the math.
We're
Just
watching the
wa-
math on this spreadsheet. I've never seen a spreadsheet more captivating in my life.
We
I love spreadsheets.
We have a winner by 1 point. The
1 point.
greatest
That was very
film
close.
score of all time, definitively, without question. No one can debate it any longer. Blade Runner.
Blade Runner.
All right.
Brendan
Best
takes it
score.
in his region. The winner of the Dreamy region has taken
The dreamy
the
region.
crown.
The dreamy region.
I'm officially going to start
Truly
a
a
band
moment.
which he didn't
A
even vote for. He
magisterial
wanted it
moment
to
for
lose in the
Vangelis.
first round. And it
I wouldn't.
won.
I wouldn't even vote it. I would have voted for ET.
That's amazing.
That's why you
Oh.
play the game, folks.
Exactly.
If there's a theme to this episode, it's musical irony. Oh, what
Wow.
a wonderful thing!
So just for the record, the scores here: Blade Runner on the preferential ballot ended up with 7 points. Star Wars and There Will Be Blood tied with 6 points, and Mishima had 5 points. So the thin red line indeed.
Yeah. It was a thin red line.
yeah, it
That's what
really
we
was.
learned. Yeah, it was there the
I
whole
think for
time.
that. I think for that reason, we should just automatically give the award to the thin red line. Hans Zimmer. Somehow you did it.
Well, that was a lot of fun. Thanks for playing, fellas, and we hope everyone enjoyed that. As we begin to wind down the show here, I want to say a thank you to all of our patrons. Your support there really helps us out a lot. You can support us there at patreon.com/InSessionFilm. A couple of quick plugs here. We have a couple of reviews. Last week we did our Spider-Man retrospective, so just a reminder that we do have a podcast review for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse that you can go and check out. We have a podcast review for Transformers Rise of the Beast. I know that's one of Ryan's favorite films of the year. Unfortunately, he couldn't be there, but I put in a good word for him, of course.
Haven't seen it.
Haven't seen it.
And the way he says that means he won't see it.
Yeah, but fine.
That is correct.
In all seriousness, though, I was joined by Brandon Wedig of Brando Critic. You can go and check out his YouTube channel. It's just Brando Critic. But we had a really fun conversation. It was fun to nerd out on that film. And I also did a video review. We'll have more of those coming down the pipeline soon. But I did a little video review for Transformers Rise of the Beast as well. Our latest Women in Session podcast is out. They talked about Billy Wilder and Some Like It Hot. And it was a great conversation for one.
Yeah.
Also, they brought up Jay at the end of the show because Jay, you did, I believe, like some sort of ranking of Billy Wilder
my
on the
God,
website.
Giant piece about Billy
Yeah.
Wilder that you put on the site. That's
Yeah.
right.
And they went through your rankings on the show and had some fun conversation around that as well. So
Yeah.
be sure to go and check out. Be sure to go and check that out. I also want to say one way to help us out is by leaving us reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And we got a new review that I wanted to take a second to read here because I thought it was pretty cool. So this comes from PETA Pan Piper, which I had to
What
say
a cool
slowly.
name.
Otherwise, I would have messed that up. Cool name, but they say this. Really enjoy this podcast, and especially the women in session. All are great, but Zeta is hilarious and particularly wise. The boys are always solid with their differing opinions and intelligent insights. However, the women tackle topics the boys miss, and vice versa. Could you ever come together to discuss a classic film or new release together? That's what would truly be engaging to see. You bounce ideas off of one another. Bravo all around. Honestly, one of my
it's a good
favorite
idea.
reviews we've ever
Yeah.
had. So that was
thanks for that.
really
That was
great to
great,
hear.
and I think that's a great idea to get on the
Yeah.
show with the lovely ladies over there and have some interesting perspectives to offer.
Absolutely. I did have Amy Thomason on for the Little Mermaid episode, which was a great conversation. So we'll definitely have to do more of that. But love to see that. Love that we're getting good feedback from this show, but especially the Women in Session this show. I'm glad people are really enjoying that. I echo that. I think they're doing a great job. So, but yeah, leave us reviews on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We really do appreciate all of that. You can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, of course, here on YouTube. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can subscribe, like, and all that sort of jazz. It really helps us out a lot. And I believe that is it. Anything else? Oh, next week on the show, something Wes Anderson related, I would imagine, correct?
Yeah.
Something to that effect?
I think so. I don't have the schedule in front of me right
Or
now.
best
to confirm.
movies about asteroids. Armageddon, #1.
Armageddon. Yeah, I like it.
We're gonna call that.
Impact.
We're gonna call that episode Armageddon time.
Oh,
There you go. Oh.
Yeah. It'll be better than that movie, to be fair.
Yeah.
That's a pretty
Maybe
good movie.
movies
Yes.
about asteroids and cities. Maybe
Maybe.
separate from each other. Anyway,
City
something-
Slickers. Yeah, that'll be what we talk about. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
got a
so-
city in it.
Yeah, so perhaps something Wes Anderson related. Unless you guys want to talk about The Flash, we could always do.
Wes Anderson
Keaton
sounds
back
great.
as Batman.
I'm very much looking forward to talking about a filmmaker that I really do enjoy.
Okay. Well, stay tuned for that. We'll have some more details coming out soon. We hope that you all enjoyed this rousing conversation on movie scores. I thought it was a lot of fun. And we'll see you all next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Go Blade Runner! What a good score.
Good stuff.